Greetings, cozy knights. Lower your swords and rest by the fire. Tonight, we journey through the hidden library of Skyrim. Books scattered across its dungeons, towers, holds, and icy ruins that most players walked right past. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from tonight, and what games you want me to cover next. And subscribe if this helps you sleep. The Vampire Hunter's Ruin. There are books in Skyrim that read like warnings, written by people who got too close to the truth. Immortal Blood is one of them. You can find it in several places. On the bookshelves in Alva's house, in the town of Morthal, in the Bard's College Library in Solitude, and in Movarth's lair itself, northeast of Morthal, tucked beside an arcane enchanter in a room southeast of where Movarth sits. The story is told entirely through a confession. A priest speaking with a mysterious visitor who comes to his chapel night after night, asking careful, methodical questions about vampires. The visitor's name is Movarth Bequine. He is a former Fighters Guild trainer, pale almost to transparency, with dark circles under his eyes that look like bruises. He believes entirely in preparation, in knowledge, in never being surprised. He tells the priest, "There are no unknowns in a blade, but your body you can trust." He learns the weaknesses of vampire after vampire, each different region, each different clan. The Bonsamu of Valenwood, who are indistinguishable from Bosmer except in candlelight. The Kirilth, who can dissolve into mist. The Volkihar of eastern Skyrim, paranoid and cruel, who live beneath the frozen lakes, and whose very breath can stop blood in the veins. The twist comes quietly. One night, Movarth fails to return. When he does come back after a month, he says he failed to find a particular clan. He cannot locate even a single one. The priest brings a candle to his face and smiles. Movarth stares at pallid skin, at ageless eyes heavy with dark hunger, at teeth. The priest says, "I have not fed in 72 hours. Movarth, the man who believed he could never be surprised, had been sitting across from his own destruction for months, feeding the very thing he hunted information about itself. And here is the part that makes this book extraordinary in the context of Skyrim. Movarth Piquine is not just a character in a book. He is a boss enemy in the game's own world. Travel northeast of Morthal, up through the dark pine forest, and you will find his lair, a cave called Movarth's Lair, filled with vampires, with him at the center. The very man who was turned, who survived it, who built his own undead kingdom beneath the cold ground, waiting. The book you can read sitting by the hearth in Morthal is the origin story of the very monster lurking a few minutes' walk from that hearth. That proximity is Skyrim at its best. The birth of every night creature. If Immortal Blood tells you what a vampire hunter becomes, this next book tells you where all vampires came from. Opusculus Lamai. Baltamezamorti. The title alone is a spell in itself. You can purchase it from Urag Gro Shub in the Arcanium at the College of Winterhold, or find it in Valerica's study inside Castle Volkihar if you have the Dawnguard expansion. It is a short text. It takes minutes to read, but what it describes reaches all the way back to before recorded history. The book frames what it's about to tell you with a single philosophical line. As brighter grows light, darker becomes shadow. Molag Bal, the Daedric prince whose entire domain is the oppression and entrapment of mortal souls, grew envious of Arche, the god of the life cycle, the one who governs death. Bal decided to walk on Nirn in the guise of a man and assault a woman of the Nedic people named Lame Beolfag. He shed a drop of blood on her brow and left. The text says, her screams became what are called the shrieking winds, the howling gales that still move through certain fjords in Skyrim. Lamai died, or appeared to die, and was found by nomads who tended her, then burned her body in accordance with their customs. But she rose from the pyre still burning, and what she did to the people who had cared for her is recorded in language that is blunt and awful. From her came a curse that replicated itself through all of Tamriel, mocking Arkay's natural order for every era to follow. The vampires in every cave and dungeon in Skyrim, every Volkar lord, every cave-dwelling bloodsucker, all trace their line back to that night. When you walk into a vampire den anywhere in Skyrim, that book sitting on Urag's shelf is the story of how they got there. A scholar walks through hell. The doors of oblivion can be found in several places across Skyrim. In Ilinalta's Deep, a sunken fort in the middle of Ilinalta Lake, south of Whiterun, sitting on a table in a flooded, torchlit room. You can also find it in Reachcliff Cave, near Markarth, in the Hall of the Dead in Falkreath, and near the Altar of Grib, south of Winterhold. It is one of the most atmospheric books in the game, because it is written from the perspective of not a hero, not a soldier, but a nervous, devoted student watching his master disappear into other dimensions. The narrator's name is Saif-Ej Hija, and his master is the great Morian Zenus, the author of a companion text in the game called On Oblivion. Zenus was one of the greatest scholars of the Daedric realms, and he spent his entire life preparing for a single journey, to physically walk through Oblivion and record what he found. He secured a method of entry through a reclusive Dunmer named Divaith Fyr, a Telvanni wizard of almost inconceivable age and power. The student stayed behind to transcribe his master's transmissions, a kind of psychic relay across dimensional walls. What follows is a guided tour of Oblivion's realms as seen by a fragile mortal mind. Cold Harbour, the realm of Molag Bal, appeared to Zenus as a dying version of Nirn itself. The imperial palace spattered and ruined, the world under the dominion of the king of rape. Quagmire, Vermina's realm, shifted every few minutes into something more horrible. A dark castle, a den of beasts, a swamp at moonlight, a coffin sealed tight. Moonshadow, Azura's realm, was so beautiful it was painful. Flowers and waterfalls seen through half-blind eyes in colours that ran like wet ink. Then came Apocrypha, an endless library, shelves in every direction, stacks upon stacks, pages floating in an unfelt wind, every book with a black cover and no title. The presences moving through those stacks, looking for something they could never name. Hija felt a shudder pass through him, and could not tell if it was his or his master's. Morian Zenus never came back. The student waited, kept the connection alive as long as he could, but eventually the transmission stopped. The book is his attempt to record everything before the silence became permanent. And if you walk through the Dragonborn DLC and descend into Apocrypha itself, the actual realm of Hermaeus Mora, you will find exactly the library Zenus described. The black-covered books, the shelves without end, the things moving between them. He saw it before any of us did. The She-Wolf of Solitude, the Wolf Queen, is not one book, but 8 volumes, and they are scattered across Skyrim in ways that reward patient exploration. Volume 1 you can find in the Blue Palace itself, in Solitude, on shelves in the Jarl's Court. Later volumes appear in locations like Proudspire Manor, the Bard's College, and various hold capitals. There is also a separate 1-volume condensed history called Biography of the Wolf Queen, a more clinical account, shorter, blunter, without the novel's dramatic interior life. Reading both is like getting the bones and the blood of the same woman. Potema Septim was born in the 67th year of the Third Era into the imperial family. Her grandfather, Emperor Uriel Septim II, looked at the silent, intense infant and whispered, "She looks like a she-wolf about to pounce." He was not wrong. Her father and mother gave her almost no affection. Her eldest brother Antiochus was already drunk and debauched at 16. She was beautiful by 14, clever beyond her years, and married at that age to King Mantiarco of Solitude, a man decades older, to cement a political alliance. She bore him a son, Uriel, after years of miscarriages, and from that birth she never stopped scheming. The Wolf Queen volumes follow Potema from her arrival at Solitude, where she had to overcome the hostility of the old Nordic houses who viewed her as an outsider. Through her slow and methodical construction of an alliance network across Skyrim, High Rock, and Morrowind, she received foreign dignitaries, including a delegation from Pyandonea, the Mormor Sea Elves, described arriving in a harbour of Solitude on a ship of chitin and membranous sails like insect wings. She hosted kings who had grudges against the emperor. She sowed seeds with patience and precision across decades. Several historians in the text point to evidence suggesting she may have cast the spell that killed her own brother Antiochus, though the book itself acknowledges the proof either way is lost, which is worth reading as the cautious hedge that it is. When her niece Kintyra was crowned empress instead of Potema's son Uriel, the rage she had been building for years finally found a shape. The War of the Red Diamond began, one of the bloodiest civil conflicts in imperial history, tearing through Skyrim, High Rock, and Morrowind simultaneously. Her forces captured and executed the young empress. Her son held the imperial throne for years, and when the war finally turned against her, when her son was killed by a mob after the Battle of Ichidag, Potema retreated to Solitude and did what only the most desperate and powerful necromancers do. She raised the dead, her skeleton chambermaids, her vampiric generals. Her kingdom became a charnel house. The biography records her death in 3 E137, after a month-long siege of her own castle, though it gives her age at death as 90, which later scholars note appears to conflict with her documented birth year of 3 E67, which would put her closer to 70. The discrepancy is likely an error in the source material, and stands as a small example of how even official imperial histories can't be taken entirely at face value. In any case, the castle where she died is the Blue Palace, where Jarl Elisif holds court today. The throne room you walk through on errands for the Civil War. The corridors where courtiers whisper. Potema ruled there once, surrounded by the dead. And the book warns that her madness was so powerful it infected the next king to rule in Solitude. Her nephew Pelagius, who would become Pelagius the Mad. The very madness you encounter during the Sheogorath questline. The Night Mother's secret name, Sacred Witness, can be found in the Dark Brotherhood Sanctuary, south of Falkreath. Specifically on the table with a basket in Babette's bedroom. The tiny vampire child who brews poisons with centuries of experience behind her ancient eyes. You can also find it in the Dawnstar Sanctuary and in the Twilight Sepulchre, among other locations. It claims to be a true history of the Night Mother, written anonymously, and an editor's note at the end identifies the author through his writing style. A poet named Enric Milnes, who was murdered shortly after publication, his killer never found. The book opens with the narrator meeting the Night Mother herself, describing it as meeting a woman unlike any other he has ever encountered. He calls her dangerous and beautiful and absolutely without conscience. What follows is a layered examination of whether the Night Mother is a Daedric prince. The consensus answer from scholars is no, but she has survived for so long and carries such power that the question itself opens something unsettling. Some scholars argue that multiple women throughout the ages simply took the title. Others believe it truly is one immortal being. The narrator argues for something in between, though the text never commits to a definitive answer. The most honest reading is that even the narrator, who met her directly, cannot say with certainty what she is. What gives Sacred Witness its real weight is the narrator's confession near the end. He helped the Night Mother and the Dark Brotherhood in acts he cannot write down. The ink seemed to turn to blood. He fled, changed his name, travelled as far as he could, and still it followed him. The book ends with a plea, "Pray for me," and then the editor's note that he was killed. In Skyrim, in the Dark Brotherhood questline, you can visit the Dawnstar Sanctuary and hear the Night Mother's voice for yourself. The book on that table is a record of someone who was exactly where you are now and did not survive it. The Void Before Everything. Sithis is a short philosophical text available from Urag Gro Shub at the College of Winterhold and also found in various Dark Brotherhood locations, including the Falkreath Sanctuary and the Dawnstar Sanctuary. It is only a few hundred words long, but it attempts something almost no other text in the game does. It tries to define the thing that exists outside of definition. The book describes Sithis as the primordial void, the formless chaos that preceded creation. Before Anu and Padme, before any gods thought themselves into existence, there was Sithis, or rather, there was nothing. And Sithis is the closest mortal language can come to describing that nothing. The book draws a connection that few players who never picked it up would know. Sithis and Lorcan, the missing god, whose dead body is Nirn itself, are linked. The text argues that Lorcan's purpose, breaking the stasis of the divine, forcing the gods into creation, tricking them into making a mortal world, was consistent with Sithis working through him. Based on what the book lays out, the most coherent reading is that the god of change used the trickster god as a vessel to inject entropy into a universe that was otherwise going to sit in perfect, sterile immortality forever. That changes the way you see the Dark Brotherhood. The assassins who serve Sithis are not just killers for hire. Within their own theology, they are agents of entropy itself, of the force that unmade the gods so that mortals could exist. The Night Mother is their conduit. Sithis is the destination. And the void is not a punishment or a prison. It is, in their belief, a return to what everything was before gods made the mistake of having ambitions. In Skyrim's Falkreath Sanctuary, past the poisoned corridors and the whispering members of the Brotherhood, Sithis's presence is represented by the Night Mother's coffin. Now you know what she sleeps in. A Dremora speaks. Spirit of the Daedra is one of the rarer and more startling books in the game, available from Urag Gro Shub, or found in dungeons with heavy Daedric presence. What makes it remarkable is its narrator, not a mortal scholar, not a priest, but a Dremora, one of Oblivion's warrior-class Daedra, speaking directly about what the Daedra are and what they want. No academic filter, no fear of being wrong. This is the view from inside. The Dremora explains that the Daedra do not think in terms of morality. They think in terms of their prince's sphere, which is more like a force of nature than a personality. A servant of Boethia does not wake up and decide to be treacherous. They are treachery in the same way a river is current. The sphere is the self. This produces something humans might call evil, but which the Dremora understands as simply being. It goes on to say that mortals who seek out Daedra for power are usually making a profound mistake, not because the Daedra are malicious toward them, but because the transaction involves two beings operating on completely different conceptual frameworks. A mortal thinks they are negotiating. A Daedric servant knows the mortal is just becoming part of a sphere that was moving long before they arrived. There is something almost restful about this. The violence and chaos of the Daedric princes, seen from inside, is not war or madness, but function. It is the universe doing what it does. Whether that is more comforting or more unsettling than a simple monster is a question Skyrim leaves for you to sit with. The Dremora at the end of the text expresses something that reads almost like curiosity about mortals. These brief, flickering things that think their choices matter. The book does not tell you whether the Dremora is right. The war that built the world. Night of Tears sits in the ritual chamber beneath Felglow Keep, northeast of Whiterun. A dungeon filled with rogue mages who broke from the College of Winterhold. Why a book about the origin of the Nords would be in the possession of rebel wizards is one of those unresolved mysteries the game simply leaves sitting there. You can also find it in other locations, including some bookshelves in the hold of Markarth. It is not long, but what it contains reframes everything you know about Ysgramor and the founding of Nordic civilization. The common story, the one Nords will tell you in any mead hall, is that the elves attacked Sarthal, the first human city in Skyrim, out of jealousy and fear. The Nords were growing too powerful, too numerous, and the snow elves could not allow it. Ysgramor fled back to Atmora, raised 500 warriors, and returned to reclaim what was taken. That is the story everyone knows. Night of Tears says the truth is more complicated. The book proposes that the elves did not attack out of pure hatred or fear of human strength. Something was discovered beneath Sarthal, something buried deep in the earth, something of power vast enough that the elves decided burning the city to the ground was preferable to letting the Nords possess it, or even know about it. The book does not name what was found. It can only observe that the entire Night of Tears, the massacre, the founding of the 500 companions, the reconquest of Skyrim, may have been triggered not by war between peoples, but by one civilization trying to bury a secret. If you do the College of Winterhold questline, you will excavate Sarthal yourself. Beneath the ruins, you will find the Eye of Magnus, an artifact of staggering and terrifying power that the college nearly tears itself apart trying to control. Night of Tears was right. The elves burned a city to keep that thing hidden, and in picking up that book in Felglow Keep's dungeon, you have read the only text in the game that was trying to warn you. The ships that built a nation. The Songs of the Return are an incomplete cycle of texts celebrating Ysgramor and the 500 companions, and they are scattered across Skyrim in ways that feel like fragments of something larger that was never fully assembled. Volume 2 is in Jorvaska, the mead hall in Whiterun, the literal physical building that came from those days. Volume 7 appears in various bookshelves across the holds. Volume 56, one of the most moving, turns up in dungeons and bookshelves throughout the country. Volume 2 opens with the day of final passage. The fleet leaving Atmora's green shores, 500 warriors on their ships. Ysgramor's two sons, Ingol and Ilga, sailing near their father. shouting war cries to each other across the waves. The storm of separation came, a divine tempest sent by the goddess Kine, and scattered the fleet. Ingol's ship, the Harak, was lost. When the storm cleared, Ilgar looked for his brother's vessel on the horizon and found nothing. Ysgramor, the great warrior who never wept for his son. Volume 5 contains perhaps the most haunting passage in all the cycle. Ysgramor, sitting by a campfire surrounded by his companions, tells the story of how his axe Wuthrad was forged. He says, "It was forged on the Night of Tears itself. He was on the last ship fleeing Sarthal, watching the city burn behind him. And he wept such grief that his tears were not salt water but purest ebony. The axe was made from those tears. Every Mer that Wuthrad ever killed died on a weapon made from a father's grief." You can see Wuthrad today. It hangs in Joravaska, in pieces, reassembled during the Companion's questline. The book you can pick up from a shelf in that same hall is the story of the tears that made it. Volume 7 tells the founding of Whiterun, that the crew of the ship Joravaska, under a captain named Jeek of the River, were first to break away from the fleet after Sarthal's reconquest, who found the Skyforge, the ancient forge at the summit of the cliff that predated even elven habitation of Skyrim. They built their hall around it. Volume 56 closes the entire cycle with the news of Ysgramor's death spreading across Tamriel. The bravest men and fiercest women who had ever lived, brought low by the knowledge that the one they followed most was gone. The last year of the First Era, the 2920 series, 12 volumes, one for each month of the last year of the First Era, is found scattered across Skyrim in bookshelves, dungeons, and merchant inventories. It is historical fiction, not presented as fact, but it draws on real events with remarkable care. The year 2920 of the First Era ended with the assassination of Emperor Raymond Cyrodiil II, and the series documents the months leading up to that moment across the entire continent of Tamriel. Volume 1, Morning Star, opens in the depths of winter in Morrowind. The tribunal still young in their new divinity. Vivek, not yet the poet-warrior god he will become. The Dunmer, still adjusting to being ruled by mortals, who had just killed their greatest champion at the Battle of Red Mountain. Volume 4, Rain's Hand, follows events in Cyrodiil, where Emperor Raymond has grown old and tired and suspicious of everyone around him. Volume 10, Frostfall, moves into Skyrim itself, following a young Nord woman whose family is caught in the political chaos spilling down from the imperial court. What 2920 gives the careful reader is a sense of Tamriel as a living, breathing world, where the consequences of events you see in Skyrim's landscape, the old roads, the imperial architecture, the ruined temples, were already being written centuries before any living NPC was born. The books themselves are sold by Ura Gro Shub and found in general bookshelves across the holds. Reading even 3 or 4 volumes changes what it feels like to look at the landscape of Skyrim. All that stone and ice, and underneath it, centuries of empires straining and breaking. The invasion nobody talks about. Report: disaster at Ionith can be found in a number of hold capitals and merchants' stocks across Skyrim, including in Farengar's library in Dragon's Reach in Whiterun, and purchasable from Ura Gro Shub. It is an after-action military document, written by the commander of Hammerfell's 10th Legion, covering one of the most catastrophic foreign policy failures in Imperial history, Emperor Uriel Septim V's invasion of Akavir. Akavir is the continent to the east of Tamriel, spoken of in Skyrim, mostly in whispers and indirectly. The dragon guard who became the blades came from there. The Taishi snake people are referenced in the annals of the dragon guard at Skyhaven Temple. But this book gives you the closest thing to a military account of what actually happened when the Empire tried to conquer it. 4 full legions, somewhere between 16 and 24,000 soldiers, accompanied the Emperor himself to the shores of Akavir. The campaign lasted less than a year. The Taishi, a serpentine civilization of unknown age and power, simply waited. They waited in the jungles and the hills, while the Imperial army advanced, stretched their supply lines beyond repair, and then they moved. Most of the force was destroyed. The Emperor barely escaped. The report is written in the dry language of military documentation, which somehow makes it more terrifying. Supply shortfalls listed next to casualty numbers. Tactical assessments of terrain that was clearly never understood. A civilization that could have ended the entire invasion at any moment, choosing instead to let the Imperials defeat themselves. Akavir still exists today in Skyrim's era, just over the eastern horizon. The game never takes you there. It never has to. Report. Disaster at Ionith tells you everything you need to know about why no one sails east looking for glory. The Empire's surviving ghosts, the rise and fall of the Blades, is a short historical account you can find in Skyhaven Temple itself. The very place built by the Blades, accessible during the main quest line when you seek Esbern and Delphine. It sits in a room with ancient banners and faded paintings of Akaviri warriors, in a place that feels like a tomb for an organization that has not quite finished dying. The text covers the transformation of the Akaviri Dragon Guard into the Imperial Blades, from their origins as dragon hunters who crossed the sea in service of the Riemann Empire, through their centuries of service as the Emperor's personal bodyguard and intelligence service. The book is most useful for understanding a quiet tragedy running underneath Skyrim's main story. By the time you find Delphine and Esbern, the Blades have been destroyed twice. Once during the Oblivion Crisis, when most were killed or scattered, and once in the Great War, when the Thalmor demanded their disbandment as a condition of the White Gold Concordat. The rise and fall of the Blades tells you what they were before all of that. A warrior order of extraordinary skill, bound to the dragon blood of the Emperor, who once swept across Tamriel hunting creatures of enormous power. The book on the shelf in Skyhaven Temple is all that remains of their history in their own words. Pick it up before you leave that temple, because the empty hall around you is the illustration. Every dragon that ever lived. Atlas of Dragons is a remarkable book for what it simply attempts to do. It is, as the title suggests, a compiled list of dragons, their names, their known status, their last known locations. You can find it in Skyhaven Temple alongside Esbern's notes and maps, and also in various hold archives. It was compiled by an organization called the Blades, which gives it an odd double quality. The list keepers are the same people in the rise and fall of the Blades, and reading both creates a strange echo. The list includes living dragons, dragons presumed dead, and dragons with unknown status. Names like Saloknir, Vinturuth, Naslarum, each one an ancient creature of fire and time, catalogued with the bureaucratic care of an empire that once considered them worth tracking. Many of the names on that list can be cross-referenced with word walls in the game. A dragon whose word wall you activate, the name on the atlas, the burial mound you stood on. These form a triangle of connection the game never explicitly draws for you. Finding Atlas of Dragons early in a playthrough, and then methodically moving through the world, checking names, is one of those quiet activities that turns Skyrim from a dragon-killing adventure into something that feels more like archaeology. There Be Dragons. There Be Dragons is a lore book found in Skyhaven Temple at the College of Winterhold and purchasable from various merchants. Where Atlas of Dragons is a list, There Be Dragons is an essay, a scholar's attempt to understand what dragons actually are in the cosmological sense, before the events of Skyrim, before Alduin's return. It is written as if dragons are extinct or nearly so, which makes it read differently once you've seen your first Whiterun dragon attack. The book proposes something significant, that dragons are not just large predatory animals, not even just intelligent beings, but something closer to forces of nature, manifestations of a fundamental principle of the universe. The text draws a connection between dragons and the concept of the voice, the Thu'um. A dragon does not use the Thu'um the way the Dovahkiin uses the Thu'um. A dragon is the Thu'um. The power does not pass through the creature. The creature is the power, wearing scales and teeth, and the slow patience of something that has existed since the first shouting of creation. This changes the resurrection mechanic the game presents. When Alduin raises a dragon from its barrow, based on this framework, he is not reviving a dead animal. He is reactivating a fundamental force of nature that was never truly gone, only dormant. And when the Dovahkiin absorbs a dragon's soul, the text's logic suggests they are not consuming a creature so much as incorporating a piece of creation into themselves. There Be Dragons is the philosophical framework under which the whole main story sits. It is in Skyhaven Temple, behind an ancient carving of Alduin's wall, waiting to be read by someone who wants to understand what they are actually doing when they shout. The maze that made a mage. A minor maze is found in the College of Winterhold's library and purchasable from Urag Gro Shub. A copy also exists in Shalidor's Maze, the hedge puzzle on the marshlands west of Morthal. It is the history of Labyrinthian, the great ruin in the mountains of Yalmarch, and of the man who built it, Shalidor, Archmage of the College of Winterhold in the early First Era. Shalidor is one of the most powerful mages in the history of Tamriel. Some accounts suggest he built Labyrinthian in a single night, working alone through sheer magical force, though this could imply the kind of mythologizing that attaches to any figure of extraordinary ability across the centuries. The book covers how he created the complex as a testing ground for the college's best students, a physical manifestation of what he believed learning magic actually required. Not just ability, not just effort, but the willingness to walk into something that was trying to kill you and keep moving. The final chamber of Labyrinthian, in the game, contains one of the most powerful masks in Skyrim, the Connachric Dragon Priest mask, found only by bringing all the other masks there. You will also find the Staff of Magnus inside Labyrinthian during the college questline. The book, A Minor Maze, available before you ever enter that building, tells you what it was built for and by whom. Walking into those arched stone halls, knowing Shalidor's intent, changes the feeling of the place entirely. The scandalous biography, The Real Baranziah, is 5 volumes, and they are found in several memorable locations across Skyrim, in the Blue Palace in Solitude, in various hold libraries, and in merchant inventories. The series is technically banned in the game. It was the source of a political scandal, and a censored version called Biography of Baranziah was released in its place. The Real Baranziah is the unexpurgated account of the Dunmer Queen Mother, written to include details that powerful people preferred removed. Baranziah is one of the most fascinating figures in Elder Scrolls history. She was the Queen of Morrowind, then Queen of Wayrest in High Rock, and her life spanned centuries. The real Barenziah covers her youth in Skyrim, being raised as a ward of a Nord family after her noble Dunmer family was displaced by politics, her escape into the wider world, her relationships with thieves and kings, her involvement with the Nightingales, and the various men and powers that used and were used by her in return. The Stones of Barenziah, the gems you can collect during the No Stone Unturned questline, are connected directly to her story. The text gives those small, sparkly objects an actual weight. Each one was taken from her. Each one is a fragment of a life that this series of books tells in full. The real Barenziah is found in Solitude's Blue Palace, the very city she once helped rule. Setting it back on the shelf when you're done feels like returning something that belongs to its subject. How the Thieves' Guild Fell. Fall from Glory is a short but stinging assessment found in the Ragged Flagon in Riften, specifically under a barrel west of the exit to the Ratway Vaults. Hidden, as if someone stashed it somewhere they hoped no one important would find it. It is written from an internal perspective, and it covers how the Thieves' Guild of Riften slipped from its position as one of the most organized criminal networks in Tamriel into the diminished, fear-haunted operation you find when you first walk into the Ragged Flagon. The book does not name Mercer Frey, but its account of corruption reaching the upper levels of the guild's leadership is essentially a shadow biography of what happened. Leadership's pact with Nocturnal through the Nightingales was meant to ensure the guild's prosperity, luck in the broadest sense, flowing from the Daedric Prince of Shadow in exchange for the Nightingale's service. When that pact was violated from within, the luck stopped, business dried up, contacts went quiet. The guild shrank. The book describes watching an organization that had survived empires and wars being brought low by internal betrayal, with the kind of tired, grieving tone of someone who helped build the thing they're watching fall. Finding this book in the Ratway, in the underground sewer network beneath Riften, in the crumbling back room of a makeshift tavern, and then working through the Thieves' Guild questline to understand what went wrong, is one of those Skyrim experiences where reading actually teaches you the shape of the story you're already living through. The Covenant of the Shadows, the Nightingales, in 2 volumes, can be found in the Nightingale Hall itself, the ancient moss-covered sanctuary in the Rift that you claim during the Thieves' Guild questline, and also in Dungeon Bookshelves and College of Winterhold holdings. Volume 1 covers the history of the Nightingales as an order. 3 individuals bound by an oath to Nocturnal, the Daedric Prince of Darkness and Luck, in exchange for enhanced abilities during their lifetimes and eternal servitude, guarding the Evergloam after their deaths. Volume 2 is darker. It covers what the oath actually costs. A Nightingale does not get to pass to Sovngarde or to any other afterlife. They are bound to the Twilight Sepulchre, the temple to Nocturnal that you explore during the questline, walking the pilgrim's path, and they serve there as spectral sentinels in exchange for what they received in life. The book frames this as a transaction rather than a punishment. Nocturnal is not described as cruel, merely exact. She gave, she will receive. The cold mathematics of a Daedric prince's idea of fairness. In the Thieves' Guild questline, you become a Nightingale. You take the oath. You stand in that stone hall in the dark and you swear. The books on the shelves around you tell you exactly what that means, if you pick them up and read before speaking the words. Carlia, Brynjolf, you, all bound to guard a door in a shadowed realm for the rest of eternity. The books were warnings that no one stopped to read. the mad warrior who changed everything, the Song of Pellinal is 7 volumes. Short, fragmentary, almost deliberately incomplete, as if the text itself reflects the chaotic nature of its subject. You can find it in Labyrinthian, in the College of Winterhold, in the Bard's College, and scattered through various dungeons. Pellinal Whitestrake is perhaps the strangest figure in all of Elder Scrolls lore, and these books contain more direct primary account of him than almost anything else in the game. Pellinal appeared during the time of St. Alessia's rebellion against the Aelids, the ancient elven lords who had enslaved humanity. He arrived from nowhere. Some accounts suggest he came from the future, others that he was an avatar of a god, others that he was simply a man of incomprehensible ability. He was a warrior saint who was also undeniably a berserker. He killed elves with a kind of focused, ecstatic fury that his companions both relied on and feared. One of the most striking passages in the series describes him attacking Umaril the Unfeathered, a powerful Aeliad lord, and afterward being found in a field with so much elf blood on him that it was soaked into the ground for yards in every direction, mumbling prayers. He is present in Skyrim in an unexpected way. The Aeliad ruin called White Gold Tower is referenced throughout these volumes as both the symbol and the site of humanity's enslavement and liberation. And certain word walls in Skyrim reference Pellinal tangentially through the theology of the divines. Talos, worshipped by the Nords, carries echoes of Pellinal in the way that the same divine force seems to incarnate repeatedly in human form. This isn't stated outright in the text, but the pattern of divine champions described across the Song of Pellinal implies a continuity that lore scholars find difficult to ignore. The god who was hidden. Shezar and the divines is purchasable from Urag Gro Shub at the College of Winterhold, and also found in Hold libraries including Dragon's Reach's library in Whiterun and the Bard's College. It covers one of the quieter mysteries in Elder Scrolls theology. The figure of Shezar, the Cyrodiilic name for what other cultures call Lorcan or Shor, the trickster god who convinced the other gods to create the mortal world, and who was killed or transformed in the process. The text notes that Shezar was once the center of Cyrodiilic religion, but was slowly pushed out and marginalized as the 8 divines became the official state theology. What Shezar and the divines argues is that this was not natural drift but a deliberate theological erasure. That the empire, for political reasons connected to appeasing elven sensibilities, chose to downplay the one god that elves universally revile. Lorcan to elves is the villain of creation, the being who tricked the gods into sacrificing their divine nature to make the mortal world, dooming them all to diminishment. The 8 divines are acceptable to elves, Shor is not. In Skyrim, the Nords still worship Shor openly in their culture, even if they do not always call him by that name. The Great Mead Hall of Sovngarde is specifically Shor's domain. The carving of Shor fighting Alduin appears in tombs. The book in Dragon's Reach's library tells you why that Norse-style warrior god is controversial in a way that his counterpart, the gentle healer Kinnereth, is not, because Shor's existence is a theological accusation against elven civilization. The moon as a corpse. The lunar Lorcan is found in the College of Winterhold's Arcanium, and also in various dungeon bookshelves. It is a short philosophical text addressing one of the most striking cosmological claims in Elder Scrolls lore, that the 2 moons of Nirn, Massa and Secunda are not celestial bodies in any conventional sense. They are the decaying body of Lorcan. The argument runs as follows. When the gods killed Lorcan and tore his heart out, his heart becoming the heart of Lorcan, the source of power at the center of Morrowind's Red Mountain, his body did not vanish. It remained in orbit around the world he had created. The moons are what is left of a god who tricked everyone into building a prison world and paid with his divine self. They are visibly decaying, the text notes. The pockmarked, mottled surface of Massa is not cratering from impacts but decomposition. And when the moons disappear, as they periodically do in Elder Scrolls lore events, this could imply that the god is closing his eyes, though the text itself stops short of stating that so plainly. If you stand on any high point in Skyrim at night, the throat of the world, the cliffs above Markarth, the walls of Riften with the Rift's forest below, and you look up at those two hanging shapes in the sky, you are looking at what the game says used to be a god. The lunar Lorcan is sitting in the college library, waiting to tell you what you're actually seeing. Every creation story at once. The monomyth is purchasable from Urag Groshub, and also found in the Bard's College, in Sadri's used wares in Windhelm, in the Hall of the Dead in Whiterun, and on bookshelves in player homes like Heljarchen Hall. The title is a reference to a real-world concept from mythology. The idea that all creation stories across human cultures share the same deep structure. In the Elder Scrolls, it means something similar but stranger. The monomyth collects and compares the creation accounts from every major culture in Tamriel. The Nords, the Elves, the Khajiit, the Argonians, the Imperials, and demonstrates that they are all describing the same events from radically different perspectives. The elves believe they came from gods and were diminished into mortality by being tricked into creation. The men believe they were created by gods to inhabit a world already made. The Khajiit have a completely different account involving a moon sugar theological framework that does not map cleanly onto either. The Argonians have an account involving the Hist, the ancient tree network that the Argonians are in some way biologically connected to, which suggests they were not created so much as grown. What the book leaves you with is not one true answer, but a sense of the universe as fundamentally a matter of perspective. That the same events look like tragedy to the elves, gift to the humans, and something entirely else to the beast races, which is based on what we can observe across the whole of Tamrielic theology. Exactly why a world containing all of them at once is as chaotic and beautiful and violent as Skyrim presents it. The Scholar Who Visited Azura. On Oblivion is a companion text to The Doors of Oblivion, written earlier by the same great mage, Morian Zenus, before he had yet found a way to physically enter those realms. You can find it in the Arcaneum at the College of Winterhold, and in various Hold libraries. Where Doors of Oblivion is a record of what Zenus eventually found, On Oblivion is his scholarly groundwork, his attempt to catalogue the Daedric princes and their realms before he had visited any of them. The book is notable for its intellectual honesty. Zenus notes that the historical record on the Daedra is deeply unreliable. Diaries, journals, witch-burning notices, and Daedra Slayer guides form his primary sources, none of which he would call trustworthy. He laments that the best way to research Oblivion would be to go there, which he has not yet done. He catalogues the realms as best he can. Cold Harbour, Quagmire, Moonshadow, Apocrypha, giving each the barest sketch of what is known. He ends with a note of determination. He will find a way in. He believes we need only fear what we do not understand, and that knowledge is worth the risk of the unknown. In the context of what happens in Doors of Oblivion, written after he disappears, On Oblivion reads as the last optimistic document of a man who was about to discover that some knowledge consumes the person who seeks it, Both books are available at the College of Winterhold. They should be read in order. The debate that would have ended magic. The black arts on trial is found in various bookshelves across Skyrim, including in the College of Winterhold, Felglow Keep, and purchased from Urag Gro Shub. It covers a formal debate on necromancy. Not whether necromancy is powerful or dangerous, but whether it should be permitted to exist at all as a school of magic. Two scholars argue the case, and the book preserves both positions with real intellectual weight. The argument against necromancy centers on the violation of Arke's domain, the god of the life cycle, whose whole function is to maintain the natural progression from life to death. Every raised corpse is a soul denied its passage. Every undead warrior is an insult to the divine order. The argument for necromancy is almost entirely pragmatic. The knowledge required to reanimate a body is the same knowledge required to understand the body at the cellular and spiritual level. And that knowledge has healing applications, military applications, alchemical applications. You cannot separate the power from the knowledge. In Skyrim, this debate is not theoretical. The College of Winterhold allows necromancy as a school of study, which is part of why Winterhold's hold residents distrust the college so deeply. The undead you encounter in Draga-filled barrows are the unintended consequence of the very knowledge the necromancers in this book were debating. And Arniel Gain in the college is actively pursuing Dwemer power through methods that echo exactly the argument made in this book's pro-necromancy position. The debate was never resolved. Skyrim chose to keep it open. The Hall Beyond Death, Sovngarde. A re-examination is found in Labyrinthian, in the College of Winterhold, and in several Hold libraries. It is written by a scholar who has clearly spent his entire career trying to understand the Nordic afterlife, not as mythology or religion, but as a real place with real geography that should, in theory, be reachable. The text examines every account of Sovngarde that the author could find, looking for consistent details that might triangulate an approach. The accounts agree on certain things. Shaw's Hall, a great mead hall at the heart of Sovngarde, where worthy Nord warriors feast and fight in eternal glory. The mists at the edge of the realm, where Alduin was known to lurk in the ancient tales, feeding on the souls of the dead and growing stronger. The bridge, where they disagree, is on how to get there. Some accounts suggest Sovngarde is reached through certain ancient barrows, particularly those aligned with specific stars. Some suggest it requires death itself, and only those who die well, in battle, with honor, can find the gate. Others imply that the throat of the world, the highest point in Skyrim, is a door. If you finish the Skyrim main quest line, you visit Sovngarde. You walk through it. The mist, the hall, the heroes, all confirmed. And what makes Sovngarde a re-examination, extraordinary in retrospect, is that the scholar got almost all of it right. He never made it there himself. He never could. But his careful, frustrated academic notes in the game's bookshelves painted an accurate picture of a place only the Dovahkiin would ever see. What the body does when it changes. Physicalities of Werewolves is a clinical, methodical text found in the Companion's Underforge in Whiterun, the underground chamber beneath Jorvaska, where the circle transforms, where Ayla, Farkas, and the others carry the beast blood. It is also found in the College of Winterhold and in various Hold libraries. It reads like a medical report, which makes it stranger than any dramatic account would be. The book tracks the physical transformation of a human body into a werewolf stage by stage. The expansion of the rib cage, the rotation of the ankle and knee joints, the growth of the skull plates, the development of the sense organs. The author writes with the detached precision of someone measuring a specimen rather than observing a miracle. The musculature increases dramatically. The sensory range expands to something the author describes as uncomfortable, even when in the form, because the world becomes so loud and so vivid that the human mind needs time to adapt. The appetite, especially, is noted with emphasis. The need to feed after transformation is not optional, and failure to feed tends to produce a kind of mindless territorial aggression. The author considers the primary danger of lycanthropy. Standing in the Underforge in Whiterun, with its carved stone channels for blood and its altar to Hircine, reading this book before you take the beast's blood, or after you already have. This is Skyrim world building at its most precise. The companions will tell you about the honor and the power. This book tells you what is happening to your joints. The Legend of the Werebear. Lycanthropic Legends of Skyrim sits in various dungeon bookshelves and can be found in the companions' holdings and in the College of Winterhold's collection. It covers something the base game of Skyrim almost entirely ignores: the werebear. While werewolves are the dominant form of lycanthropy in the game, the book documents evidence for werebears as a distinct and separate form of the curse, believed to be more common in Solstheim and the northern coasts. The text draws on folktales and eyewitness accounts from coastal fishing communities who describe a large, powerful bipedal bear creature that moves with more intelligence than a simple animal, but less restraint than a person. The book debates whether werebears descend from a different pact with Hircine than the one that created werewolves, or whether they are a regional variation. Cold climate lycanthropy, adapting to available apex predators. The practical difference, the author notes, is that a werebear in the far north can survive in conditions a werewolf would find paralyzing. The fur is thicker. The bog protects against cold that would slow a wolf-form creature. In the Dragonborn DLC on Solstheim, you can actually encounter werebears in the northern reaches of the island. They are there exactly as the book describes: powerful, aggressive, moving through the snow with an intelligence that feels wrong. Having read lycanthropic legends first makes those encounters feel less like random wildlife and more like evidence accumulating for something the book was cautiously trying to prove. The book that walks you through someone else's memory. The Dreamstride is found in the library of Nightcaller Temple, a ruined fort on the clifftop overlooking Dawnstar. Occupied by worshippers of Vermina, the Daedric Prince of Nightmares. You reach it during the Waking Nightmare quest, following a priest of Mara named Erender through chambers of sleeping orcs and devotees frozen by a gas called the Miasma. The book sits on a pedestal in the temple's upper library, and you retrieve it specifically to understand how to navigate past a magical barrier that blocks the way deeper in. What the book describes is one of the most unusual powers in Tamriel's magical tradition. The Dreamstride itself, a state induced by drinking a potion called Vermina's Torpor. The person who consumes it briefly merges with a nearby mind, experiencing that person's memories from the inside as if they are their own. They emerge from it in the other person's physical location, disoriented, displaced, with no way back except to wait. The text notes that this was apparently explored for military and intelligence purposes. An agent who could walk through another person's recollections might emerge on the other side of a locked door in a room their body never entered. The horror underlying the Waking Nightmare quest is more grounded than you might expect. Years before your arrival, orcs attacked the temple to destroy the Skull of Corruption, a staff of Vermina that had been afflicting the nearby town of Dawnstar with nightmares. The priests, unable to repel the attack, released the miasma and put everyone inside, invaders and defenders alike, to sleep. The skull remained trapped in the sealed interior, leaking nightmare energy into Dawnstar's population for years. The Dream Stride is your tool for navigating past what the miasma left behind. The book in the library explains the method. Erender, it eventually emerges, was one of those priests. He is the person whose memories you walk through, and the chain you pull in his recollection is the one that released the gas that trapped him there for all those years. The Wisp Mother's uncertain nature. The Wisp Mother sits in the College of Winterhold's Arcanium and in bookshelves across the holds. Wisp Mothers, the pale, silent, drifting entities that move through Skyrim's forests and snowfields trailing little floating lights, are one of the game's most distinctive visual presences. They look like women made of ice and frost vapor, and they attack with cold magic that can freeze you in place. And almost no one who plays Skyrim knows what they actually are. This book is the only serious attempt the game makes to explain. The author presents three competing theories. First, that Wisp Mothers are spirits of women who died alone in the wilderness. Grief solidified into magical form, the cold of dying in the snow becoming part of what they are. Second, that they are not former humans at all, but entirely non-human entities, part of the natural magic ecosystem of Skyrim's northern reaches, functioning similarly to how certain deep-sea creatures develop bioluminescence as lures, the little floating lights attracting prey toward the larger entity. Third, that Wisp Mothers are something like ambient magic given form by the land itself, that they arise spontaneously in places where old magic is strong. Some scholars have even noted that their tapered ears and ethereal movements could imply a connection to the Snow Elves, though the book stops well short of asserting this. The book does not resolve this. It ends with the author noting that getting close enough to a Wisp Mother to study it in detail has, historically, not gone well for researchers. Every Wisp Mother you encounter in the game after reading this text is suddenly an open question. The lights floating ahead of you in the dark forest could be grief made visible. They could be teeth. The dragon before the dragon, before the Ages of Man, is found in multiple locations, including the College of Winterhold, the Bard's College, and purchased from Urag Gro Shub. It is a history textbook in the most literal sense, an account of the Dawn Era and the Merethic Era, the periods before recorded history, before humans were the dominant force in Tamriel. It is also one of the very few texts that tries to coherently summarize the events of the dawn of the world. The Dawn Era is described as a time before the rules of the universe were fully fixed, before time worked consistently, before death was permanent, before the laws of magic that Skyrim's world operates on were established. The Aedra and Daedra were still active in the world in direct ways. The great Aldmeri civilization of elves stretched from Somerset to Morrowind. Men had not yet arrived from Atmora in any significant number. The book covers the gradual retreat of the gods, the hardening of the world's rules into something stable, and the slow arrival of humanity from across the Northern Sea. What this means for Skyrim itself is that everything the Dragonborn walks through, the ancient barrows, the crumbling Dwemer towers, the oldest word walls with their faded carvings, was laid down in a period this book is describing, before the Ages of Man is in the College of Winterhold, because that institution, in its current form, is among the newest things in Skyrim. The ruins it surrounds are among the oldest. The book on the shelf inside is the gap between those two facts. the mage who wrote in ashes. Azidal's descent is found in Kolbjorn Barrow, on Solstheim, buried beneath volcanic ash, accessible during the Unearthed quest in the Dragonborn DLC. It is the legend of Azidal, a Nord of the First Era who became one of the most powerful enchanters in Tamriel's history, at a cost that the book makes unflinchingly clear. Azidal was born in a time when elves still controlled much of the northern lands, and when Nord settlements were frequently raided and destroyed. His village was one such casualty. He watched his family and community burned by elves, and he made a decision that the book calls one of the most consequential in Nord history. Rather than swearing vengeance through blade and battle, as any proper Nord warrior would, he travelled to the elves themselves and asked to be taught. He trained with Altmeri enchanters, with Dwemer artificers, absorbing techniques and methods that no Nord had ever been permitted to learn. He became more skilled than his teachers, and then he turned every skill they had given him toward destroying them. The mask Azidal is in Kolbjorn Barrow, buried with him, guarded by Draga, he himself enchanted. It is one of the game's most powerful enchanting-related artifacts. Reading his history before you fight for that mask changes the confrontation entirely. The ancient warrior in those ash-covered depths is not just a dungeon boss. He is a man who spent a lifetime building toward a revenge that the book implies ultimately consumed everything he became. The Pirate King's Curse. Deathbrand is a legend found in Raven Rock and other Solstheim locations, notably near the coastal sites where the Deathbrand treasure pieces are buried. The story follows the last hours of a pirate king named Haknir Deathbrand, one of the most feared pirates on the Sea of Ghosts, who knew he was dying and chose to distribute his most valuable treasures across the island of Solstheim, rather than allow anyone to possess them all at once. The legend claims that Haknir placed his armor in separate pieces, helm, gauntlets, boots, cuirass, in locations where only someone willing to piece together his story would find them. He cursed the armor such that anyone who found one piece would be compelled to seek the rest, and he cursed the treasure such that he himself would rise to defend it if his killers ever came to claim it. The book is not simply a legend, but what functions in practice as the instruction manual for a hidden questline on Solstheim. The Deathbrand armor set is actually in the game, actually distributed across the island exactly as the legend describes, and Haknir Deathbrand's ghost actually appears when you gather it all. Sitting in Raven Rock's buildings or in the ruins near the coast, the book Deathbrand is a dead pirate's challenge. He wrote the story and placed it near enough to the treasure that someone ambitious enough to read would be ambitious enough to try. And centuries later, the Dragonborn can walk out the door and begin following the trail he left. The dragon whose war ended time. Thuum. A study is available in the College of Winterhold and at High Hrothgar, specifically on the table near Wulfgar, one of the Greybeards, who can be overheard using it as a reference during meditation. The text covers the 3 shouts that were developed specifically to fight dragons. Dragonrend, which forced a dragon to experience the concept of mortality. Whirlwind Sprint, developed to close distance against a flying target. And Iceform, which could immobilize a dragon long enough for ground fighters to reach it. The account of developing Dragonrend is the most striking section. The shout required its creators to deeply understand mortal experience in order to express it in the dragon tongue, which is a language that does not naturally contain the concept of an ending. Shouting Dragonrend at a dragon was not attacking it. It was forcing the creature to experience, for the first time, the possibility that it could cease to exist. At High Hrothgar, the book near Wulfgar, is surrounded by people who have dedicated their lives to mastering the voice. Having read Thu'um, a study before arriving at High Hrothgar changes how the Greybeards reverence for the shouting sounds. They are not simply practicing a powerful skill. They are maintaining a relationship with language that was once the only thing that stood between civilization and Alduin. The children who taught theology. The light and the dark is found in temples across the holds, in the College of Winterhold, and purchasable from Urag Gro Shub. It is framed as a lesson being taught to children, but the content is full theological instruction using the children's context as a structural simplification, rather than a genuine simplification of the ideas. The text uses light and shadow as a pedagogical framework for explaining the relationship between the Aedra and Daedra, between creation and the void, between Mundus, the mortal world, and oblivion. Children can follow the surface of the story. Light is good. Shadow is the absence of light. Creation is the light the gods made when they built the world. But the text's deeper argument is more ambivalent. Shadow is not evil. It is the inevitable consequence of light. And a world without shadow would be a world without depth or form. Sithis, the void, is not darkness as an enemy. It is the condition that makes light visible. In Skyrim, the Dark Brotherhood in their Falkreath sanctuary worship Sithis. Their children pray to the Night Mother. Their members move through shadow as a matter of practice and theology. Reading The Light and the Dark, a children's text, from their shelves in the sanctuary is one of those inversions the game performs without explanation, leaving you to sit with the discomfort of finding a children's lesson in the home of assassins. A theft that changed the library. Shadow Marks is found in the Thieves Guild's headquarters, in the Ragged Flagon in Riften, in Nightingale Hall in the Rift, and in the possession of experienced guild members. It is a practical reference guide to the marks that guild members leave for each other. A specific language of scratches and symbols carved into doorframes, corners of buildings, and the edges of steps that communicate information about risk and opportunity to anyone who knows how to read them. The marks encode safe house, danger, loot, guild cache, beware guard, move quickly, contact nearby. The symbol set is simple enough to carve with a blade and complex enough to communicate specific warnings. Reading the guide and then walking through Riften with fresh eyes reveals that the city is annotated. The guild has been writing on the city's surfaces for years, and every citizen who is not reading the marks is walking past a layer of communication they do not know is there. In this sense, Shadow Marks is one of the most effective world-building texts in the game. Not because it reveals anything dramatic about the Elder Scrolls mythology, but because it demonstrates that the world has depth in the most literal sense. The walls of Riften are a conversation thieves have been having for decades. The guide on Brynjolf's shelf in the Ragged Flagon is the decoder ring. The king whose tower stands. The Dragon War is found in Skyhaven Temple, in the College of Winterhold, and in various hold libraries, and it covers the conflict that shaped Skyrim before any of the other books in the library were written. The war between dragons and men in the Merethic era, before even Ysgramor's return. The Dragon War was the period when dragons ruled Skyrim as absolute lords. The dragon cult served them. The Thu'um was their monopoly, and human civilization existed on terms the dragons set. The text covers how the revolt began. A group of humans who were taught the Thu'um by a dragon named Paarthurnax, who had, for reasons the text does not fully explain, decided to side with mortals against his own kind. The war is documented as a slow, grinding reversal of power. humans who had mastered the shout driving back creatures who had previously been their unquestioned masters. At the throat of the world in the game, Paarthurnax is still alive. He has been there since the Dragon War. He taught the ancient heroes the Dragon Wren's shout that was used to defeat Alduin the first time, and he has been meditating in the cold for thousands of years, waiting for the situation to resolve one way or another. The Dragon War in Skyhaven Temple is the founding document of the building you are standing in. The dragon mentioned in it is an hour's walk up the mountain. A tragedy in the smallest possible key. A tragedy in black is found in various dungeon bookshelves across Skyrim. In Lami's house in Morthal, in the College of Winterhold, and purchasable from Urag Groshub. It is a short folk tale about a boy who finds a summoning circle, reads the words, and summons a Dremora instead of the helpful spirit the circle was supposed to attract. The story is told in the style of a children's cautionary tale. Short sentences, simple arc, clear moral. But what it actually covers is deeply unsettling if you think about the Dremora's perspective, rather than the boy's. The Dremora in the story is not malicious in any conventional sense. It arrives, assesses the situation, a child, an incomplete summoning, a circle drawn badly, and states flatly what it is and what it is capable of. The boy, not understanding what he is called, tries to make demands. The Dremora explains patiently that the demands are not properly formulated and that the circle as drawn does not bind it to anything. The conversation that follows is the most courteous description of a person being in terrible danger in the game's entire library. The Dremora departs through the same void it arrived from, noting that the circle was educational. What happened to the boy is left to the reader's imagination. A Tragedy in Black is in Morthal because Morthal is the sort of place where children might reasonably find old summoning circles. It is also in dungeon bookshelves because the people who left those books there were probably also working with circles they did not fully understand. The War That Changed the World. The Great War is one of the most important books in Skyrim for understanding why the world you are walking through looks the way it does. It sits in Farengar's library in Dragon's Reach in Whiterun, in the College of Winterhold, in the Bard's College in Solitude, and is purchasable from Urag Groshub. It was written by a man called Legate Justianus Quintius, who commanded Hammerfell's 10th Legion during the conflict, and who was wounded in the assault on the Imperial City in 4E 173. The Aldmeri Dominion, the reborn empire of the High Elves under the control of the Thalmor, sent a covered cart to the Imperial City in 4E 171. Inside were the heads of every Blades agent who had been stationed in their territory. Alongside the cart came an ultimatum. Disband the Blades entirely, outlaw the worship of Talos, cede large sections of southern Hammerfell to the Dominion, and pay staggering tributes. The Emperor Titus Mede II refused. The war began that same day. The book covers 4 years of catastrophic fighting across Cyrodiil and Hammerfell. The Imperial City itself was captured, its palace burned, the White Gold Tower looted and desecrated. The Emperor fled north and regrouped. Then, in one of the most dramatic reversals in recent Imperial history, launched a 3-pronged assault called the Battle of the Red Ring that encircled and annihilated the entire Aldmeri force in Cyrodiil. He won the battle. He still lost the war. The Empire was too exhausted to continue. The White Gold Concordat was signed, granting the Thalmor almost everything in their original ultimatum. The Blades were disbanded. Talos worship was banned. Every Thalmor Justicia you encounter harassing people in Skyrim is a direct consequence of the document the Emperor signed in defeat after winning his greatest military victory. The Great War is in Dragon's Reach because it is essential context for the Jarl's position in Skyrim's civil war. Jarls across the holds are choosing between the empire that signed that concordat and the Stormcloaks, who refuse to accept it. The book is not ancient history. It is the argument happening in every hold in the game right now. The end of the Third Era, the Oblivion Crisis, is found in the Dwemer Museum in Markarth, in the College of Winterhold, and is purchasable from various merchants and Urag Gro Shub. It is written as a straight historical account by Praxis Sarcorum, Imperial historian, and it covers the events of the fourth Elder Scrolls game in the clinical language of someone who lived through the aftermath. The crisis ended the Septim line of emperors, and every reference in Skyrim to the end of the Third Era, the broken blades, the absent emperor, the erosion of imperial power, flows from what this book describes. The account covers how the Emperor Uriel Septim VII was assassinated, how his illegitimate son Martin Septim became the last carrier of the dragon blood, and how the Daedric prince Mehrunes Dagon broke through into the world in physical form. The resolution was total and permanent. Martin Septim shattered the Amulet of Kings and transformed into a giant divine avatar of Akatosh that destroyed Dagon and drove him back to oblivion. Martin died in the process, leaving no heir, leaving no dragon blood in the Imperial line. The White Gold Tower in the Imperial City contains a statue of Akatosh, where the dragon avatar stood, and will always contain it, because stone is what is left when gods burn out. The Oblivion Crisis is referenced all over Skyrim in fragments, in journals, in NPC dialogue, in the very existence of the Thalmor who capitalized on its chaos. Having this book early gives all those fragments a foundation. The Living Journal of a Dead Order, the Annals of the Dragon Guard, is found in Skyhaven Temple itself, and is carried in by Esbern and set on the table in the Sleeping Giant Inn's basement in Riverwood during the quest Alduin's Wall. It is also one of the few books in the game classified as a quest item, which means it has genuine weight in the game's own mechanical logic. Esbern, the Last Blade, brings this document with him because it is the institutional memory of an order that no longer legally exists. The annals cover only a narrow window of years, 1 E2800 to 1 E2819. But each entry is dense with consequence. In 1 E2801, Emperor Kastav ordered the Dragon Guard to seize hostages from Markarth and Hroldan to enforce conscription quotas. The Dragon Guard refused on the grounds that it violated their oath of allegiance. Kastav sent another Akaviri commander, Kalian, who sacked Winterhold instead. Local Nords could not tell the Akaviri apart and laid siege to Skyhaven Temple in retaliation, trapping the Dragon Guard inside their own fortress. In 1 E2812, the new emperor gave permission to begin construction of Alduin's Wall. 6 years of labor, craftsmen from temples across the empire. In 1 E2818, the wall was finished, the blood seal consecrated. Emperor Riemann II came to dedicate it. The annals describe all of this in the dry language of official record-keeping, which somehow makes it more poignant. An organization doing careful administrative work to prepare a warning for people who had not been born yet. The wall they finished is the wall you stand in front of during the main quest line. Every entry in the annals is a footstep that led there. The crystal that tore the dwarves apart, the Ethereum Wars, is found in Farengar's study in Dragon's Reach, in the Bard's College in Solitude, in Calselmo's Tower, in Understone Keep in Markarth, and in various dungeons. Reading it for the first time triggers a miscellaneous quest pointing you toward the Dwemer ruin of Arkenthams in the Reach, beginning the quest line Lost to the Ages. The book was ostensibly written by a scholar named Taran Dreth, but there is a painful footnote. The actual research belonged to an adventurer named Katria, who died in Arkenthams before she could publish it, and whose ghost is waiting there when you arrive. The text covers the discovery by Dwemer city-states of a material called Ethereum, a rare luminescent blue crystal found deep underground. Modern scholars consider it little more than a curiosity, because no conventional process can enchant, smelt, mould, or break it. The Dwemer, of course, considered that a challenge rather than a barrier. 4 city-states formed an alliance to mine and study Ethereum. They built a forge deep below the settlement of Bethaft in the Rift, powered by magma. The artifacts they created were of extraordinary power, and then the alliance shattered, each city wanting sole control of the forge. Internal warfare consumed decades. When King Gelir conquered the weakened city-states, the Ethereum forge was sealed, and the Ethereum crest needed to open it was shattered into 4 shards scattered across Skyrim. The book ends with a challenge. The forge has never been found. Maybe it was destroyed. Maybe it is still there. Pick up the book and walk to Arkenthams, and Katria's ghost will tell you the rest. The battle that ended an elvish age. Fall of the Snow Prince is found on an alchemy table in Sarthul, just after the puzzle room, in the Dwemer Museum in Markarth, in Solitude's radiant raiment upstairs, purchasable from Urag Gro Shub, and in the Skarl Village Great Hall on Solstheim. It is one of those books that reads like a work of mourning, written from the perspective of the victors about someone they killed, who they could not help but respect. The text is an account of the Battle of the Mörsring on Solstheim, transcribed by a chronicler named Lokheim, who served under a Nordic chieftain. Isgramor had driven the Snow Elves, the Farmer, as they were also known, from Skyrim, and was now hunting them on Solstheim. The elves were vastly outnumbered and losing. Then a single rider appeared on the battlefield, and the elven army, beaten and desperate, cried out with joy rather than fear. This was the Snow Prince, arriving to rally them for a final stand. He moved through the Nord warriors like a storm given shape, his spear spinning, his armor radiating cold light. Ulfgi Anvilhan fell before him. Strom the White fell. Freda Oakenone fell. Heimdall the Frenzied fell. Then a girl named Finna, 12 years old, a squire to her mother, watched the Snow Prince cut down her mother in the melee. In her grief and rage, she picked up her fallen mother's sword and threw it. The throw struck home. The Snow Prince fell. An entire civilization's hope collapsed with him. The Nords won, but they buried the Snow Prince wrapped in fine silk, his armor and spear on a pedestal of honor, his tomb arrayed with treasures worthy of royalty. They did not burn him. They gave him a barrow, even though his body would not receive the protection of Stalrim. That was reserved for Nord, dead only. In the Dawnguard DLC, the surviving Snow Elves, Knight Paladin Gelibor and a handful of ghostly prelates frozen in time are still waiting in the Forgotten Vale in western Skyrim, the very last remnants of a civilization that ended on Solstheim the day Finna threw her mother's sword. The book in Sarthul is part of the same story. You excavate the first city the Nords built in Skyrim, the city the elves burned, while the book nearby tells you where it all ended. The quill that possessed its owner. Feyfalken is 3 volumes found in various bookshelves across Skyrim. All 3 appear in the Bard's College in Solitude, where they fit perfectly among a collection of stories about art and talent and ambition. Each volume is structured as a story being told by a figure called the Great Sage to his students, which gives the whole thing a fireside quality that makes it easy to fall into. The central character is Thorbad, a scribe for the temple of Oriel in Alinor, who has become mute from an illness called the Crimson Plague, and who communicates only through writing. His messenger boy, Gorgos, convinces him to have a quill enchanted by the newly founded Mages Guild, paying a small fortune for the highest available soul, a Daedric one from a spirit called Fyfolken, a servitor of Clavicus Vile. The enchanted quill transforms everything Thorbad writes into work of extraordinary beauty. His temple bulletins become illuminated manuscripts. His detractors send him apologies. His critics are silenced. But Volume 2 reveals what is happening underneath. When Thorbad tries to write anything Fyfolken does not want written, the quill transforms the words into variations of suicide notes. Whatever direction Thorbad writes, however he angles the message, Fyfolken redirects it toward the same ending. Volume 3 arrives at the funeral, with more admirers than Thorbad would have believed possible, moved by writing that was never really his. Clavicus Vile got a soul in exchange for producing something beautiful that destroyed the soul's owner. You can pick up all 3 volumes in the Bard's College, then walk up to the stage where Skyrim's bards perform and understand why a college dedicated to preserving art contains a story about art's most dangerous seduction. The lovers in the tomb of Fiori and Holgir is found in many locations across Skyrim, in Arcadia's Cauldron in Whiterun, in the Bard's College, in Jorvaska in Whiterun, in Clan Shattershield's office in Windhelm, and purchasable from Urag Gro Shub, among others. It is also found near the entrance pillar puzzle inside the dungeon of Anselvund, northeast of Shaw's Stone in the Rift, placed there because the book is the key to the puzzle itself. It is a short poem, barely a page, but it carries the weight of several much longer texts because of where it ends up mattering in the game. Fiori was a huntress. In her 29th year, she met the warlord Holgir on a field of battle. No one alive can remember what they were fighting about, the poem notes, because the love that came after made the cause of the battle irrelevant. They fought to a standstill until her sword broke his axe and his shield wore down her blade, and all their followers could see that they were equals. They fell in love, and for a time there was peace between the clans of the forest. Then a snake bit Holgir in the deep woods, and his venom ran deep. Fiori crossed snow-covered mountains and went to the coast to obtain a cure from visitors from Akavir. She returned, gave Holgir the last drop of the elixir, and the snake bit her in the same moment. Fatigued from her long journey, she died immediately. His grief was such that he built a tomb and then took his own life to rejoin her. In Skyrim, Anselvund is the tomb the poem built, a dungeon in the Rift where a grieving conjurer named Lua Alskarven has raised an army of Draga because she learned about Fiori and Holgir and wanted to use Holgir's body as a vessel to resurrect her own fallen husband. At the end of Anselvund's burial chambers, you encounter the Draugr remains of Fiori and Holgir themselves. When Lua is defeated, their ghosts appear, blue lights rising from the ancient remains, 2 figures who have been waiting in that stone dark for a very long time, finally at rest. The book near the entrance puzzle is the poem that explains why any of this happened. The animal sequence it describes, eagle, snake, whale, snake, is literally the combination needed to open the pillar lock. The story is the key. The Boy Who Named Himself Twice. The Adventures of Eslaf Errol is 4 volumes. Beggar, Thief, Warrior and King. And they are scattered across Skyrim in bookshelves, merchant inventories, and College of Winterhold holdings. Each book also functions as a skill book, raising a different skill. Beggar and Thief raise Pickpocket. Warrior raises Block. King raises Two-Handed. But the reason to read them in order is a joke hidden in plain sight that most players never catch. Eslaf Errol is the name of the protagonist, and his adventures take him through the expected stages of a rags-to-royalty story. Born in poverty, learning to steal, fighting his way to power, eventually claiming a kingdom. The journey is told with a dry wit that makes it one of the more enjoyable reads in the game's library. The names of the supporting characters are similarly unusual, each slightly off, slightly too constructed. The books were written by an author named Wochin Jarth, and the names throughout are anagrams. Eslaf spelled backward gives you false. Errol spelled backward gives you law. Together, false law. Each volume's cast of characters has names that, rearranged, comment on the story being told or on the reader taking it too seriously. This is not just a literary trick for its own sake. The Elder Scrolls series has a long tradition of histories and biographies that turn out to be unreliable, contested, or outright fabricated. The name of the hero of this series is a warning embedded in plain sight. You are reading something designed to be taken seriously that is quietly telling you not to. The 4 volumes are in various bookshelves across the holds, and finding all 4 and reading them through is one of the small pleasures of Skyrim's library. The book that asks you to choose. Kolb and the Dragon deserves its own moment because it is unlike anything else in the game. It is found in multiple locations: Dragon's Reach's library in Whiterun, the College of Winterhold, the Bard's College, and several inns and merchant inventories across the holds. Every copy is a small, battered-looking book that a player might pass over in favour of something more apparently substantial. Do not pass it over. Kolb and the Dragon is Skyrim's choose-your-own-adventure book, presented entirely as in-game readable text. The player reads a page, is presented with options: go left, go right, fight the dragon, run from the dragon, and then flips to the corresponding section. Kolb is a Nord warrior who encounters a dragon, and the possible outcomes range from heroic victory to death by various imaginative means. It is funny, it is compact, and it functions as a miniature meditation on the idea of the Dovahkiin. The warrior encountering a dragon, with the reader's choice determining the outcome. In a game where your choices are supposed to matter, a book that is literally built around making choices and living with the consequences is the most self-aware object in Skyrim's library. Finding it in Dragon's Reach, where the court wizard Farengar maintains a room full of dragon research, and where a living dragon named Odahving is eventually chained to the porch, makes the book feel like it knows exactly where it is. The Dinner That Was a Murder. A game at dinner is found in the Thieves' Guild's Ragged Flagon in Riften, in the Palace of the Kings in Windhelm, in the College of Winterhold, and purchasable from Ura Gross Shub. It is a published letter, written anonymously by a spy, describing an extraordinary dinner hosted by a prince named Helseth, a figure from Morrowind's political history, and the game of suspicion, counter-manipulation, and quiet poison administration that played out over the course of the meal. The letter describes Helseth as a prince who rules by never letting anyone feel certain they are not being watched. He hosted a dinner for his counselors and introduced a subtle element of theatrical paranoia. There was a possibility, he implied without stating, that the wine was poisoned and that the antidote had been distributed selectively. The guests spent the meal trying to determine who had the antidote and whether they needed to obtain it, beg for it, or already possessed it. The author of the letter, observing from a position of access, notes that at least 2 counselors died of natural anxiety over the course of the following week. Helseth accomplished a political culling without touching anyone. This is the kind of story that appears in Skyrim's library to remind you that the Nords are not the only culture in Tamriel, and that power operates very differently in Morrowind than it does in a mead hall. Reading. A game at dinner before you take on the Thieves' Guild quest line in Riften changes the way the city's layered deceptions feel. Everyone in Riften is playing Helseth's dinner game. The Red Mountains fire and what it left. The Red Year is found in the Palace of the Kings in Windhelm, in the dungeon of Ranveig's Fast, in the College of Winterhold, and purchasable from Urag Gro Shub. It is a collection of eyewitness accounts of the eruption of Red Mountain on Vardenfell, the volcanic island at the centre of Morrowind, in 4E5, 4th Era, Year 5. The event was catastrophic. The entire landscape of the island was transformed. The Dark Elf civilization that had existed there for millennia was essentially erased in a matter of days. The accounts come from people of all classes. A fishing family who ran toward the coast when the sky turned red and found only more fire at the shore. A Dunmer noble whose ancestral estate had stood for 800 years and survived in rubble. A merchant who was visiting on business and had left his ship's manifest on the pier. The only record of what his cargo had been, now floating in the harbour ash. One account is from a child who survived by hiding in a stone well. When you encounter the Dunmer refugees in Windhelm's Grey Quarter, forbidden from owning property, crowded into the worst district of the city, surviving on the hospitality of a city that barely wants them there. The Red Year explains why they are in Skyrim at all. They did not come by choice. They came because there was nothing left behind them. The war no one talks about, Neriva at Red Mountain, is one of the rarest books in Skyrim. It was added with the Dragonborn DLC, and the only copy in the main game world is on a bookshelf in Tel Mithrin. Tel Mithrin, the Mushroom Tower village of the Telvanni wizard Neloth on Solstheim. You can also find it in Apocrypha, on a table during the At the Summit of Apocrypha quest. That it is primarily accessible through a Daedric realm of forbidden knowledge and the private holdings of one of Morrowind's most secretive wizards is deeply appropriate for its subject. The Battle of Red Mountain, which occurred thousands of years before Skyrim's events, was the single most consequential moment in Dunmer history. The details are contested by every cultural group involved, and Neriva at Red Mountain is unusual in that it presents a scholarly analysis rather than a partisan account. The tribunal, Vivek, Almalexia, and Sotasil were mortal generals who fought alongside Indoril Neriva, the greatest hero of the Dunmer people. After the battle, they used a device called the Heart of Lorcan to make themselves into gods. The questions the book circles are: what exactly happened to Neriva at the end of that battle? And did the tribunal have a role in his death? The book does not answer definitively. The most coherent reading of the available evidence is presented, but the author is careful to mark where inference ends and evidence begins. In Skyrim, Dunmer, who have reached the city of Windhelm, have brought this history with them. The few who worship the old Daedra and reject the tribunal as false gods are living out the consequences of a theological argument that Nereva at Red Mountain sets on the table. The Dragonborn prophecy written in stone. The Book of the Dragonborn is found as early as the very opening moments of the game. A copy sits on a table in Helgen Keep during the Unbound quest, barely minutes into the playthrough. It also appears in various hold libraries in the Bard's College and purchasable from Urag Gro Shub. Written by Prior Emmeline Madrine of the Order of Talos, it is a short examination of the concept of the Dragonborn. Not a celebration, but a careful analysis of what that term actually meant to different cultures at different times. The book covers the Raymond dynasty, the line of emperors who were themselves Dragonborn and around whose power the Blades and Drakengard organized. It discusses what the divine blood of Akatosh actually conferred, and how the concept of the Dragonborn shifted from a specific hereditary line to a prophesied individual who would appear at the end of an age. The text discusses the Akaviri Drakengard's original purpose, searching Tamriel for those who might carry the dragon blood, and notes that the connection between being Dragonborn and being able to absorb dragon souls was understood even before Tiber Septim formalized the Blades as an institution. What the book gives you, if you find it before the main quest takes shape, is the understanding that you are walking into a role that was carved in stone more than 3,000 years before you were born. The throat of the world in the distance, the word walls in every ruin, the ancient barrows with their sleeping dragon priests. All of it is the set dressing for a lineage someone began to record when Skyrim was young. The Book of the Dragonborn is on that table in Helgen. Keep in the smoke and confusion of the very first scene, quietly waiting to explain everything that is about to happen. The Brotherhood's genesis, the Brothers of Darkness, is found in the Dark Brotherhood Sanctuary, in Falkreath, in the Bard's College, in Movarth's lair north of Morthal, and purchasable from Urag Gro Shub. It traces the historical connection between two organizations that many players treat as entirely separate. The Morag Tong, the Assassin's Guild sanctioned by the Dunmer Tribunal, and the Dark Brotherhood. The book argues that the Brotherhood did not emerge independently, but evolved directly from the Morag Tong, and that the split came down to a theological question. Who do you kill for, and why? The Morag Tong operated under tribunal sanction, executing writs that were legally approved forms of murder for hire. A faction within the Tong held that this framework was too constrained, that the only true service was to Sithis directly, without the mediation of mortal legal structures or even the tribunal's authority. That faction eventually became the Dark Brotherhood. The Night Mother, the entity the Brotherhood reveres, was their philosophical justification, a direct channel to Sithis that bypassed all earthly authority. In Skyrim, the Dark Brotherhood's questline puts you in proximity to this theology at every turn. The text Brothers of Darkness, sitting in the Falkreath Sanctuary on the very shelf where Brotherhood members would have shelved their personal reading, is the doctrinal origin of everything you are doing in that dungeon. How to call the Brotherhood. A kiss, sweet mother, is found in the Dark Brotherhood Sanctuary in Falkreath in various dungeons, and purchasable from Urag Gro Shub. It is one of the shortest books in the game, barely a page, and it describes the procedure for performing the Black Sacrament, the ritual by which a mortal can call the Dark Brotherhood to fulfill a contract. The ritual requires an effigy of the intended victim, assembled from actual body parts, a heart, skull, bones and flesh, encircled with candles. The practitioner must stab the effigy repeatedly with a dagger rubbed with the petals of a nightshade plant, whispering, sweet mother, send your child unto me, for the sins of the unworthy must be baptized in blood and fear. The Night Mother hears, and if the contract is legitimate, she sends an assassin. The book is written in the style of an instructional manual, which makes it distinctly unsettling, not because the content is operatic, but because it is procedural. Someone wrote down the steps. Someone wanted this to be replicable. In Skyrim's Dark Brotherhood questline, you investigate a house in Windhelm, where a child named Aventus Aretino has been performing the sacrament for days, surrounded by the bone and nightshade, calling for someone to come. He heard about the Brotherhood from rumors and reconstructed the ritual from fragments. Reading A Kiss, Sweet Mother. Before that questline begins tells you exactly how a child learned to do what he did. The book was somewhere. He found it. The Night Mother's 5 children. The Night Mother's truth is found in the Dark Brotherhood Sanctuary in Falkreath, in the Dawnstar Sanctuary, and purchasable from Urag Gro Shub. Where Sacred Witness asked who the Night Mother is, this text asks what she did. The 2 books read most productively together, because they approach the same figure from opposite directions. The Night Mother's truth covers the 5 children. Long before she became the immortal matron of the Brotherhood, the Night Mother was said to be a mortal woman in Cyrodiil, who bore 5 children, and then sacrificed them all to Sithis. The act is presented in the text not as an atrocity, but as a consecration. The most absolute possible offering to the void, the surrender of what should have been most protected. In exchange, Sithis made her his consort, and the channel through which contracts flow from the mortal world into the Brotherhood's service. She is called the Unholy Matron. The book notes that the identities of the children are lost to history, as is the precise location of the event. Some scholars doubt the story entirely, arguing that the Night Mother is more symbol than person. Others maintain that the 5 children's bones are stored in the coffin that travels with the Brotherhood wherever it establishes a sanctuary. In Skyrim, the Night Mother's coffin is in the Falkreath Sanctuary. You are told it contains her remains. The Night Mother's truth is on the shelf a few feet away, telling you what those remains might mean. The Brotherhood's Genesis fire and darkness. The Brotherhoods of Death is found in the Falkreath Sanctuary, in the College of Winterhold, and in various Hold archives. It is often shelved alongside Brothers of Darkness and Sacred Witness, forming an informal triad on the Dark Brotherhood's origins. Where Brothers of Darkness focuses on the Morag-Tong split and theological differences, Fire and Darkness takes a wider view, covering both organizations as institutions across centuries. The text examines how the Brotherhood expanded from Morrowind into the rest of Tamriel during periods of political fragmentation, when central authority was too weak to suppress them. It covers how they maintained internal discipline when members violated the 5 tenets, and how the listener and the speakers and the Black Hand operated as a hierarchy designed to prevent any single person from having enough information to destroy the entire network. The structure was deliberately cellular. Even a captured member could not expose more than their immediate circle. The Skyrim Brotherhood is presented in the game as a diminished version of what once existed. Hollowed out, traumatized, barely surviving. Read in Fire and Darkness, before the Skyrim questline begins, makes the contrast between the Brotherhood's architecture of power described in the book and the crumbling sanctuary with its handful of survivors feel like archaeological grief. You are not joining an organization. You are finding the bones of one. The Mad God's Terrible Bargains. The 16 Accords of Madness is 3 separate volumes, 6, 9 and 12, found in various locations across Skyrim, including the College of Winterhold. the Bard's College, and accessible during Sheogorath's questline. Each volume covers a different agreement struck between Sheogorath, the Daedric Prince of Madness, and another prince or significant entity, with consequences that ripple outward in catastrophic directions. Volume 6 covers Sheogorath's agreement with Malakath over a warrior who caught both their attentions. Volume 9 covers an accord with Hermaeus Mora that involves knowledge that reconfigures the mind of anyone who truly understands it. Volume 12 covers an agreement with Hircine over a hunt, where the prey is someone both princes have claims on, and the resolution involves a lateral creativity that, even by Daedric standards, represents something genuinely unusual. What the accords reveal, collectively, is how the Daedric princes interact with each other, not as enemies or allies in any conventional sense, but as entities whose spheres occasionally overlap and who resolve those overlaps through formally negotiated instruments that have the logic of legal contracts and the morality of something much older and stranger. In Skyrim, when you deal with the Daedric Shrine quests scattered across the holds, you are operating in the margins of a much larger system of agreements. These books are small glimpses into that system structure. The Wobberjack's origin story. The book Wobberjack is found in Pelagius's wing in the Blue Palace of Solitude during the Sheogorath questline, specifically accessible while you are inside the mind of Pelagius the Mad, which is already one of the stranger locations in the game. It is also found in the College of Winterhold. The book tells a story that reads like a children's tale about someone who summoned Sheogorath by mistake and the price they paid. A child named Tevus attempted to summon Hermaeus Mora, the Prince of Forbidden Knowledge, because he had heard that the prince would grant anything in exchange for the right tribute. He performed the ritual, gathered the offerings, spoke the words. Sheogorath showed up instead. The Prince of Madness, in what is framed as great good humor, noted that the summoning was technically incorrect and offered the child a choice: be destroyed or accept a gift. Tevos accepted the gift. The gift was the Wobberjack, a staff that transforms whatever it strikes into something random, usually hilarious, often fatal. The Wobberjack is an actual item in Skyrim, obtainable by completing Sheogorath's questline. Reading the book before that quest gives you the object's mythology. Reading it afterward, staff in hand, makes you the inheritor of Tevos's mistake. The book is in Pelagius's deranged mental landscape because Sheogorath was responsible for Pelagius's madness too, and the prince has a habit of leaving gifts that alter the recipient permanently. What it means to be racial, notes on racial phylogeny, is found in the College of Winterhold's Arcanium, in Calcelmo's Tower in Markarth, and purchasable from Urag Gro Shub. It is a dry academic study on something that sounds purely scholarly, but opens in surprising directions. Can the different races of Tamriel reproduce with each other? The text documents known cases and analyzes the biological and magical mechanisms involved. The races of men, Nords, Imperials, Redguards, Bretons, can interbreed relatively freely, the book concludes. Mer, Altmer, Dunmer, Bosmer can interbreed with each other and with some races of men, but with significant variation in outcome. Bretons, the book argues, are themselves a historical example of prolonged human-mer interbreeding, carrying both bloodlines in their heritage. The Khajiit and Argonians present a different case entirely. Their physiology has components that seem to operate on different biological principles from the other races, and the book's conclusions, in their regard, are noticeably more hedged. The reason this matters in Skyrim is that every hold you walk through contains the descendants of centuries of these interactions. The Bretons who occasionally pass through as merchants or soldiers carry in their blood the evidence of something the book analyzes in clinical language. Understanding racial phylogeny makes the diversity of Tamriel's people feel less like a roster of fantasy species and more like the outcome of actual history. The book is in Calselmo's tower in Markarth because Calselmo is a scholar of Dwemer culture, and the Dwemer are conspicuously absent from the racial phylogeny analysis, which tells you something about how separate they kept themselves. The hierarchy of oblivion. Varieties of Daedra is found in the College of Winterhold, in various dungeons with high Daedric presence, and purchasable from Urag Gro Shub. It covers the organizational structure of Oblivion's inhabitants, not just the great Daedric princes, but the full hierarchy beneath them. Most players know the princes by name from the shrine quests. Far fewer know what the texts say about the beings that serve them. The book describes a tiered system. At the lowest level are Daedra, that function more like animals, or elemental forces, scamps, clanfear, flame atronachs, bound by instinct and sphere, rather than anything resembling individual will. In the middle tiers are entities like Dremora and Zivilai, who possess genuine intelligence, loyalty to their prince, and something approaching personal identity and pride. The highest tier below the princes themselves includes entities of such power and specificity that they function as the prince's hands in the mortal world, capable of making decisions and exercising a degree of independent judgment. This matters in Skyrim because the Daedra you encounter in shrines and dungeons are not interchangeable. A Dremora encountered during the Daedric Prince quest is different in kind from an Atronach summoned by a mage. Varieties of Daedra gives you the vocabulary to understand that difference, and it makes the Daedric Shrine quests, where you interact directly with prince-level entities, feel like a more navigable negotiation when you know how far down the hierarchy you are standing. The comedy in the Alteration School. Breathing water is found in the Arcanium at the College of Winterhold, in the Bard's College in Solitude, in Lami's house in Morthal, and in several dungeon bookshelves. It also functions as a skill book that raises your alteration skill when you first read it. It is one of the funnier books in Skyrim's library, operating as a kind of parable about the gap between magical ambition and magical reality. The story concerns a man named Tharion Winloth, a toll collector for the Kamona Tong in the city of Vivek in Morrowind, a criminal at the lower end of a criminal hierarchy who earned barely any gold of his own. He had witnessed a smuggler ship called the Morodrung sink in the harbour years ago, and he became fixated on the treasure he believed was inside it. Unable to afford a conventional water-breathing potion strong enough to let him stay submerged long enough to reach it, he sought out a sorceress named Serene Relas, famous for her mastery of alteration, and convinced her to teach him the spell itself. The lessons were difficult. Relas was unconventional. But Tharion persisted. The ending is delivered in a single sentence. On a moonless night, Tharion finally cast the spell and dove into the harbour. He reached the ghostly shadow of the sunken ship. He felt the magicka surge through him as he pushed deeper down. And then he felt the spell begin to fade. He could break reality long enough to breathe water all the way back to the surface, but not enough to reach the ship. The treasure was close enough to see and too far to touch. Breathing water is in the college because it is, quietly, a meditation on what magic actually is versus what people want it to be. The alteration skill increase is almost incidental. The real thing the book raises is a kind of skeptical warmth toward people who pursue power for the wrong reasons and get exactly what they asked for. The Last Scabbard's Edge. Last Scabbard of a Crash is found in radiant raiment in solitude, in the College of Winterhold, purchasable from Urag Groshub, and in various dungeon bookshelves. The author's description of the book in promotional material across Tamriel's in-game booksellers reads as a joke, romance, slavery, and head-lopping, which captures the book's genre-colliding nature accurately. It is a love story set in Hammerfell involving a slave armourer named Sathrion and the free woman who owns the last functional scabbard for an ancient and irreplaceable sword. The sword itself has historical significance, the scabbard's owner has emotional significance, and the armourer has the skill to repair the one and the desire to understand the other. The plot involves several murders, a political intrigue, and a sword fight that functions as a kind of love scene. What makes it memorable, rather than just lurid, is the care the author shows for Hammerfell's culture. The Redguard martial tradition, the pride in swordcraft as a form of identity, the way violence and artistry are treated as the same discipline. Hammerfell barely appears in Skyrim's game world directly. It lies to the southwest, outside the game's borders. Last Scabbard of a Crash, sitting in radiant raiment in solitude, is one of the few texts that makes Hammerfell feel like a real place with a specific culture, rather than a direction on a map. The Constellations of Nirn. The Firmament is found in Farengar's library in Dragon's Reach, in the College of Winterhold, in the Bard's College, and purchasable from Urag Groshub. It is the most comprehensive catalogue in Skyrim of the game's 13 constellations, the signs that govern a character's birth and that players select during character creation at the start of the game. Most players choose a standing stone benefit and move on. The Firmament gives those choices a mythology. The 13 constellations are divided into 3 groups: the Guardian Signs, the Warrior, the Mage, and the Thief, who each protect 4 lesser signs. The Warrior governs the Lady, the Lord, the Steed, and the Serpent. The Mage governs the Apprentice, the Atronach, the Ritual, and the Tower. The Thief governs the Lover, the Shadow, the Tower, and the Serpent. The Serpent is the anomaly. It crosses the sky in ways that are considered ominous by most astrologers, belonging to no Guardian's protection. The Firmament covers not just the mechanics of birth sign influence, but the cultural interpretations each hold places on those born under particular signs. The standing stones scattered across Skyrim that reproduce. Some of these constellation benefits are visible everywhere. The Warrior Stone outside Riverwood, the Steed Stone in Harfinger, the Lord Stone in the Pale. After reading the Firmament, those stone circles in the fog and snow feel like anchors for something much older than the current game world's politics. The stars above Skyrim are a civilization's oldest map. A Healer's Field Guide, Herbalist's Guide to Skyrim, is found in Arcadia's Cauldron in Whiterun, in the College of Winterhold, in the Bard's College, and purchasable from Urag Groshub. It reads exactly as the title suggests, a practical botanical survey of the plants found across the province, with their alchemical properties documented for each. This is a skill book that raises alchemy, and its information is directly applicable to gameplay. What makes it interesting beyond its mechanical function is the voice of the author, who writes with the gruff warmth of someone who has spent years outdoors and developed strong opinions about which plants are overvalued and which are underrated. The entry on Nirnroot, the glowing, chiming plant found near water, is particularly notable because the author mentions that alchemists have been paying premium prices for it. but that it is genuinely difficult to work with and prone to losing potency quickly after harvesting. In Skyrim's main game, an alchemist named Sindarian in the Reach spent years of his life chasing Nirnroot across the province. A detail that, based on what the herbalist's guide describes, suggests someone was paying too much for the wrong reasons. Walking through Skyrim's wilderness after reading this book changes the landscape slightly. The blue mountain flowers on the hillsides outside Whiterun, the snow breeze near the frost-covered stones of the Pale, the hanging moss in Jarlmarch's bogs, all have names and uses in the field guide. The world is labelled quietly if you know where to look. A practical guide to killing trolls. Troll slaying is found in Arcadia's Cauldron in Whiterun, in the College of Winterhold, in various inns, and purchasable from merchants across the holds. It is brief, practical, and has one of the funniest structural reversals in Skyrim's entire book collection. The text opens with a cheerful promise to tell the reader everything they need to know about fighting trolls, including the secret to killing them reliably. A secret the author says is so effective, they are surprised it is not more widely known. The guide covers troll biology with real accuracy, their regenerative abilities, their preference for ambush, their weakness to fire. The author builds toward the promised secret with the patience of someone who genuinely enjoys the setup. And then, having described the regeneration in detail, the author delivers the secret: fire. Trolls cannot regenerate damage dealt by fire. There it is, the secret that the author has been building to across several paragraphs is information that an experienced adventurer would consider so obvious as to be embarrassing to formalize. The book is entirely straight-faced about it. It presents the obvious as revelation with complete sincerity. This is one of the clearest examples of Skyrim's library having a sense of humor about itself. The book is available in Arcadia's Cauldron in Whiterun, a shop that sells fire salts and potions of flame, which either makes it a brilliant placement or an accidental product endorsement. 4 adventurers walk into a cemetery. Incident in Necrom is found in the College of Winterhold, the Bard's College, in various dungeon bookshelves, and purchasable from Urag Groshub. Necrom is a Dunmer city in Morrowind, specifically the City of the Dead, a massive necropolis where Dunmer bury their honoured ancestors and maintain an elaborate system of ancestor worship and funerary rites. The incident in the title involves 4 adventurers who hired out to the city to clear a graveyard disturbance, which turned out to be a vampire infestation. The book is structured as an after-action report told with too much colour by one of the surviving adventurers. What makes it notable is how specifically it demonstrates the use of illusion magic in a combat context. The vampire controlling multiple party members simultaneously, while the remaining fighters try to work out who was ensorcelled and who was not. The survivor's account dwells on the sensory detail of the experience. The cold emanating from the vampire, the way controlled party members moved slightly wrong, the sound of their own breathing in the stone corridors. Illusion magic is often treated as the least visceral of the magical schools. Incident in Necrom argues otherwise. It is in the College of Winterhold because it functions as a case study, and it is in dungeon bookshelves across Skyrim because the dungeons you explore are full of variations on the same scenario the book describes. Reading it in a vampire cave you are currently clearing puts its clinical observation in uncomfortable proximity to your own situation. The Sound of Civilization Gone. Chronicles of Nchuleft is found in the Dwemer Museum in Markarth, in Calselmo's Tower, in Understone Keep, in the College of Winterhold, and purchasable from Urag Groshub, Markarth was built on the bones of a Dwemer city, and the Dwemer Museum exists to catalogue what Caltelmo and his researchers have found. This book belongs in that museum the way a primary source belongs in an archive. The chronicles document a Dwemer gathering, specifically a meeting between representatives of different Dwemer holds in a building called Nchuleft to address a political matter that the surviving fragments make difficult to fully reconstruct. What the document does preserve is the texture of how Dwemer operated, their political formalism, their use of elaborate written protocols for disagreement, and the sudden intrusion of what appears to be an assassination plot that terminates the record mid-sentence. The transcript simply stops. No conclusion, no resolution. Whatever happened in that room, the document survived the Dwemer themselves by several thousand years. Sitting in Markarth's museum, surrounded by reconstructed Dwemer machinery and classified former remains, Chronicles of Nchuleft reads like a recording that kept running after everyone left the room. Calcelmo's tower, accessible during the game's College of Winterhold questline, holds more text like this. The Dwemer did not disappear all at once in Markarth streets. They disappeared in the middle of a sentence. The monks who trade sight for knowledge, pension of the ancestor. Moth is found in the Hall of the Dead in Whiterun, in the Bard's College, in the College of Winterhold, and purchasable from Urag Gro Shub. The ancestor moth monks are one of the most specialized religious orders in Elder Scrolls lore. Their entire purpose is to read the Elder Scrolls, a task so demanding and spiritually taxing that it progressively blinds the reader. The pension describes the order's structure in ceremonial language that reveals how the monks understand their own sacrifice. A new monk receives their sight, the ability to read the scrolls, fresh and undiminished. With each reading, vision dims. A monk who has read 3 scrolls sees only magical auras. A monk who has read 5 sees only light and dark. A monk who has read 7 is functionally blind in any conventional sense, but the order holds that such a monk can see more than any sighted person. Not the world as it is, but the world as it was ordained to be, as written in the scrolls before time recorded what had actually happened. Whether this is a genuine transcendence or a consolation offered to those who have given their eyes for the institution is a question the book does not try to answer. In the Dawnguard DLC, the Elder Scrolls questline brings you into contact with ancestor moth monks. Reading the pension beforehand transforms those encounters from a mysterious, eccentric institution into something that feels genuinely ancient and internally coherent. People who chose blindness on a timetable, understanding exactly what each reading would cost them. The old order that remembers everything. The old ways is found in the College of Winterhold, the Bard's College, and purchasable from Urag Gro Shub. It covers the Sigic Order, the oldest magical organization in Tamriel. Older than the Mages Guild, older than the Empire, possibly older than recorded history. Their island of Artaeum does not appear on most maps because it occasionally simply is not there. The island has disappeared from the physical world multiple times in history and been found again, or not. The Old Ways presents the Sigic Order's philosophy that magic in its formalized, guild-systematized form represents a fundamental coarsening of something that was once subtle and interior. The Sigics practiced the Old Way, a form of contemplative magical discipline that did not use soul gems, enchanting tables, or alchemy stations, but cultivated power through understanding of what the text calls the Elder Way, an internalized attunement to the fundamental forces of time and change. The Guild's arrival under Vanus Galerion was, to the Sigics, the moment magic became a commodity rather than a calling. In the College of Winterhold questline, agents of the Sigic Order appear without warning to speak directly to the Dovahkiin about the Eye of Magnus. They already know what is coming. They have, based on the philosophy described in this text, been watching Skyrim from a vantage point that is not exactly in the present. The Old Ways is in the college's library, the very institution whose existence the Sigics regret, as if placed there by someone who thought both parties should understand each other better. The god beneath the desert. Spirit of Nirn examines the figure of Lorcan, the missing god, the trickster who convinced the other divinities to sacrifice their divine nature to create the mortal world, through the lens of how different cultures across Tamriel understand and name him. It is found in the Bard's College, the College of Winterhold, and purchasable from Urag Gro Shub. The Nords call him Shor and revere him as a warrior god, the master of Sovngarde, the patron of human ambition. The Imperials, in their Cyrodiilic tradition, call him Shezar, and have marginalized him for political reasons. The Dunmer call him the Doom Drum, and see him as the embodiment of chaos. The Khajiit have a version of the same figure in their mythology, who plays a different but recognizable role. The Altmer, most directly, regard him as the enemy of divine perfection, the one who broke the celestial order to make something lesser and mortal in which they now find themselves trapped. What Spirit of Nirn argues is that all of these names point to the same force, and that the diversity of interpretations reflects not different gods, but different responses to the same theological trauma. The creation of the mortal world. Every culture on the list either mourns Lorcan, fears him, or reveres him. None are neutral about him. He is in the earth beneath every dungeon in Skyrim, in the sky at night as Massa and Secunda, according to the lunar Lorcan, and in every word wall as the Thu'um that his children, the dragons, once monopolized. Spirit of Nirn is in the Bard's College, because every song Skyrim's bards sing, about Isgramor, about the Nord's gods, about ancient glory, is, in some sense, about Shor. A covenant written in flesh. Trials of St. Alessia is found in temples of the divines across Skyrim, in the Temple of Kinnereth in Whiterun, in the Temple of the Divines in Solitude, in the College of Winterhold, and purchasable from Urag Gro Shub. It is a short verse text, written in the style of religious scripture rather than scholarship, and it covers the alleged covenant between Alessia, the first human saint, the slave queen who led the rebellion against the Aelids, and Akatosh, the dragon god of time. The text describes Alessia praying to the gods on behalf of her enslaved people in the early First Era, and Akatosh appearing to her in the form of a burning dragon. The covenant that emerges grants the human races of Tamriel protection from Daedric invasion. The dragon fires, the ceremonial fires maintained in the White Gold Tower, serve as the physical anchor for a barrier that prevents Daedra from manifesting in the world freely. In exchange, the dragon blood must be passed through the rulers of Cyrodiil, ensuring that someone with Akatosh's divine lineage is always present to maintain the covenant. This covenant is why the Oblivion Crisis was so catastrophic. The dragon fires went out when the Septim line ended, and Mehrunes Dagon came through. The covenant's resolution through Martin's sacrifice was not the rebuilding of the old system, but its permanent conclusion. The covenant was fulfilled, and the dragon fires are now no longer necessary, because the barrier is now structural rather than maintained. Trials of St. Alessia in the Temple of Kinnereth in Whiterun is the founding document of a system whose ending is now the history you can read about in the Oblivion Crisis on the same shelf. The History of the Dark Places, a short history of Morrowind, is found in the College of Winterhold, in Sadri's used wares in Windhelm, in various bookshelves throughout East March, and purchasable from Urag Gro Shub. Windhelm has a significant Dunmer refugee population, and this book's presence there is appropriate. It is the kind of text a displaced person might carry as a way of keeping their home with them when the home is no longer available. The text gives a broad overview of Morrowind's geography and political structure, focused primarily on Vardenfell, the volcanic island at the province's heart that was destroyed in the Red Year. It covers the administrative districts of the island, the great houses and their roles, the religious institutions of the tribunal temple, and the economic realities of a province built around the mining of ebony and glass and the farming of ashland-adapted crops that do not grow anywhere else in Tamriel. The tone is warmly scholarly, written by someone who clearly loves their subject. By the time of Skyrim's fourth era, everything this book describes in the present tense no longer exists in the form it describes. The great houses are scattered. The tribunal's divine claims collapsed when the heart of Lorcan was destroyed in the events of Morrowind. Vardenfell is ash and ruin. A short history of Morrowind is, without intending to be, an elegy. The Dunmer, standing in Windhelm's grey quarter, refusing to leave despite the discrimination they face, are the people this book was describing. The book is what they remember. The Valenwood and its people, A Dance in Fire, 7 volumes, each covering different experiences of an imperial courier named Decimus Scotti, moving through a hostile Valenwood during the 5 Years' War, is found across Skyrim's bookshelves, in merchant stocks, in the College of Winterhold, and purchasable from Urag Gro Shub. The 5 Years' War between Valenwood and Elsewhere is not a major focus of the game's plot, but it produced one of the most unusual books in the library. Scotti is not a soldier or a spy. He's a senior imperial clerk sent with the trade mission, completely unprepared for what he encounters in the deep forest. Each volume drops him deeper into Valenwood's political violence. Bosmer clans fighting each other, Khajiit mercenaries whose loyalties are unclear, imperial officers whose grip on the situation is progressively less reliable, and throughout it all, the forest itself, the green pact that prevents Bosmer from harming any plant, meaning all building, is done from dead or imported wood. All food must be meat, and the forest floor is the domain of things that predate any current civilization's claims on it. Scotti survives each volume with increasing damage to his dignity, and later his body, and the books track his transformation from a bureaucrat irritated by inconvenience into someone who understands, by the final volume, that the world is more complicated than any Imperial dispatch office prepared him for. The series is often funny. It is also quietly the most sustained portrait in Skyrim's library of what it feels like to encounter a culture that operates on entirely different principles than your own. The Imperial history that explains everything. The Arcturian heresy is found in the College of Winterhold, in the Palace of the Kings in Windhelm, and purchasable from Urag Gro Shub. It presents an account of Tiber Septim's rise to power that contradicts the accepted imperial version in almost every significant detail. Written from the perspective of someone who was there and who has clearly decided they have nothing left to lose by telling the truth as they experienced it. The received imperial account of Tiber Septim, the founder of the Third Era, the man who became the god Talos after his death, presents him as a heroic general who united Tamriel through a combination of military genius and divine mandate. the Arcturian heresy describes a more morally ambiguous figure, politically calculating, willing to betray allies, and operating with a relationship to truth that the author calls flexible at best. Specific events the official record attributes to noble motives are reframed here as cold, strategic decisions. The Numidium, the great Dwemer brass automaton that Tiber Septim used to complete his conquest of Tamriel, is described in terms that make it clear the author found its use profoundly wrong. In Skyrim, the Thalmor refuse to acknowledge Talos as a god specifically because they reject the divine legitimacy of Tiber Septim's line. The Arcturian heresy is the one text in the game's library that might make you understand, without agreeing with, why a high elf would look at the worship of Talos and see a mortal politician's successful rebranding rather than genuine divinity. The book is in the College and in Windhelm, two places where the question of what authority means is constantly under examination. Every god at once. Varieties of faith in the Empire is found in temples across the holds. The Temple of the Divines in Solitude, the Temple of Kinnereth in Whiterun, the Bee and Barb in Riften, and purchasable from various merchants including Urag Gro Shub. It is the closest thing to a complete religious reference text that Skyrim's library provides. A compiled catalogue of the gods worshipped across Tamriel, covering not just the 8 divines, but the Daedric princes, the tribunal's divine claims, and the various regional and racial pantheons that exist alongside the imperial system. The text is notable for its editorial restraint. The author does not declare any religious position true or false. Each entry describes what believers hold, what rituals they practice, what the gods are understood to provide, and where the theological disputes lie. The entry on Talos, who would, in the 4th era when Skyrim is set, become both a god of the 8 divines and a banned religion, is written in language that belongs to the 3rd era, when his worship was uncontroversial. There is something quietly melancholy about reading a neutral academic description of a deity whose worship is now illegal in the empire that elevated him. Varieties of faith in the empire in the Temple of Kinnereth in Whiterun is surrounded by shrine offerings and prayer candles, and Nords who whisper to their gods. The book treats the same gods with the impersonal precision of a catalogue. Both approaches are true at once, which is part of what makes Tamriel's religious landscape feel inhabited. The house gods who refuse to bow. The House of Troubles is found in Sadri's used wares in Windhelm, in the homes of Dunmer characters across the Eastmarch area, in the College of Winterhold, and purchasable from Urag Gro Shub. It is a religious text from the Dunmer tradition, covering the 4 Daedric princes who are acknowledged, whether worshipped or resisted, specifically within tribunal religion: Mehrunes Dagon, Sheogorath, Malakath, and Moleg Bal. The House of Troubles presents these 4 not as purely evil figures, but as theologically necessary ones. The forces of chaos, testing, and opposition that give order its meaning. The tribunal doctrine holds that these Daedra represent challenges to be overcome, rather than powers to be served. They represent the principle that the Dunmer people are defined by what they resist as much as by what they revere. The text language, when describing these princes, is respectful, in the way that a soldier respects a dangerous enemy. Careful, alert, without illusion. In Windhelm, the Dunmer who have taken refuge there carry this shift with them. When they speak about their gods, they are speaking about a religious tradition that is in the middle of its most significant transformation in recorded history. The House of Troubles is a document of the tension between the old theology and the new one. Readable in the few small rooms of the Grey Quarter, alongside the people who are living it, the poem that began everything. Red Eagle's Right is found near Red Eagle Redoubt in the Reach, a forsworn stronghold on a high crag west of Markarth. On a pedestal inside the structure that serves as something between a shrine and a command post. You can also find it in the Dwemer Museum in Markarth and in various Hold archives. It is an ancient invocation written in verse, calling on the spirit of Red Eagle, the legendary king of the Reach, to rise and defend his people. Red Eagle was a Reachman king of the First Era, who refused to surrender his homeland when a conquering force demanded it. The verses describe the circumstances of his defiance, a small kingdom surrounded by enemies. Red Eagle making a pact with the Daedric force to gain the power to resist rather than yield. He died in battle, but the legend holds that he swore to return when his people needed him. The invocation is not a historical record so much as a prayer constructed from historical elements, designed to call forward both his memory and his spirit. In Skyrim, Red Eagle's tomb is a real location in the Reach, and a questline involving his cursed sword culminates at that tomb. The Forsworn who occupy the Reach consider Red Eagle a founding ancestor. Their argument that the Reach is their land, not the Nords, is articulated partly through his legend. Finding Red Eagle's right in the stronghold before starting that quest line gives the ancient poem a political context. It is still being used as the Forsworn imagine Red Eagle himself intended. The collapse at the edge of the world. On the Great Collapse is found in the College of Winterhold itself, in the Arcanaeum, where Ura Grosha presides over one of the most damaged intellectual institutions in Skyrim, and in various Hold archives and bookshelves. It covers the event in 4 EU 122, when a catastrophic storm system struck the cliffs of Winterhold, and most of the city fell into the sea in a matter of days. The text is written with the controlled grief of someone who watched it happen, and knows they survived something they did not deserve to survive more than others did. Before the collapse, Winterhold was one of the most significant cities in Skyrim, a center of trade, of imperial administrative function, of cultural life sustained by its proximity to the college. After the collapse, only a handful of streets remained clinging to the edge of the cliff. The college itself, built on a separate rock formation a short bridge away, was untouched. The surviving Nords of Winterhold noticed. They have never forgiven it. On the Great Collapse is in the Arcanaeum, because it is a document about what happened to the community the college exists within. Every NPC in Winterhold who speaks to you with cold suspicion, every reference to the college's reputation for bringing disaster, every awkward silence when a Winterhold citizen mentions what the storm took. All of that is the living aftermath of what this book describes. The collapse did not destroy the college. That is the wound. The door that opens inward. Ruminations on the Elder Scroll is found in the College of Winterhold's Arcanaeum, available from Ura Gro Shub, and occasionally in the inventories of very high-level merchants. It was written by Septimus Cygnus, who is also a character you can find in the game. An elderly, quietly unhinged scholar, living alone in an ice cave in the Sea of Ghosts, north of Winterhold, surrounded by scrolls and diagrams. Reading the book and then finding Septimus produces the same feeling as finding out that the author of a deeply concerning journal entry is your neighbor. The text attempts to describe what the Elder Scrolls are in metaphysical terms, and it fails in a way that is clearly intentional. The prose circles and loops, using metaphors that contradict each other, building toward statements that collapse under their own weight. Septimus is not being obscure for its own sake. The content of an Elder Scroll cannot be described in linear text because it exists outside of linear time. The text is the shape of an impossible description, accurate in its inability to be accurate. Reading it produces genuine disorientation, which may be the closest any reader can get to understanding what the scrolls actually contain. Septimus Cygnus, the author, appears in the Dragonborn's path during the main questline. By the time you find him in his ice cave, the book has told you what he has been doing out there alone, and the gap between the intellectual project the text describes and the condition of its author when you find him is one of the quieter tragedies in Skyrim's story. The War in Miniature. The Song of Hrormir is found in the Bard's College in Solitude, in the College of Winterhold, and purchasable from Urag Gro Shub. It is one of the older heroic poems in Skyrim's library, following a warrior named Hrormir, who makes the mistake of accepting a job from Sheogorath. The Prince of Madness needed someone retrieved from a place called the Dark Kingdom of Elfendor, and Hrormir, whose reputation for bravery outpaced his caution, accepted without asking enough questions. The poem covers Hrormir's descent through challenges that operate on the logic of nightmare rather than conventional dungeon crawling. Each obstacle is designed not to kill him, but to disorient him, to make him doubt which direction is forward, which is up, which opponent is real, and which is a shadow Sheogorath made to distract him. The poem's resolution involves Hrormir doing something so unexpected that even the Dark Kings, ancient entities of considerable power, are caught without a response to it. He wins through a maneuver that no tactical manual would have recommended, and Sheogorath's payment for the job is itself a riddle that Hrormir apparently chooses to interpret as a compliment. The Song of Hrormir is in the Bard's College because it is, genuinely, a great song. The narrative moves quickly, the imagery is striking, and the ending rewards close attention. Bards in Skyrim's game world would perform versions of this. The copy on the shelf is what they would study. The Secrets of Ragnvald. The Secret of Ragnvald is found in Ragnvald Temple itself, the Nordic ruin in the Reach near Markarth. On a pedestal inside the structure, waiting to be read before or after you work out what happened to the place. It is a poem, not a straightforward history, and it covers the defeat of King Otar the Mad at the hands of his own guardians. Otar was a powerful dragon priest who ruled Ragnvald and descended into a madness that his subjects, even his most loyal servants, eventually decided posed more risk than any alternative. The poem describes the guardian sealing Otar within his own sanctum, using a pair of enchanted skulls placed as locks, trapping both the king and themselves within the tomb, rather than allow him to range freely across the Reach. The poem frames their choice as sacrifice rather than murder. They chose confinement over the possibility that Otar, unleashed, would destroy everything they protected. In the game, Ragnvald Temple is a dungeon you can enter, and at the bottom of which Otar's sealed chamber sits. Two Draga guardians named Torsten and Serek stand holding the skull locks, exactly as the poem describes. The magic that sealed the chamber is still active. Removing the skulls to access Otar's dragon priest mask is the act the poem's heroes prevented for centuries. The poem is on a pedestal in the outer temple, written by someone who wanted anyone who came here to understand what they were about to undo. The soldier stuck in a castle. The rear guard is found in various dungeon bookshelves across Skyrim, in the College of Winterhold, in the Bard's College, and purchasable from Urag Gro Shub. It is one of the funnier books in the collection, structured as the diary of an imperial soldier posted to a remote castle during a siege that has been going on so long that the strategic situation has become irrelevant to daily survival. The enemy outside has stopped actively attacking. The supply lines from the Imperial side have stopped delivering. The soldier is left in a castle with depleted rations, colleagues of varying degrees of usefulness, and an increasingly complex relationship with the castle's internal politics regarding food allocation. The comedy builds through the soldier's attempts to maintain military discipline, while the actual military situation has become absurd. Regulations are cited regarding water rations in a castle with a working well. The hierarchy of command is invoked to settle disputes about which bunk belongs to whom. The enemy outside, at one point, sends in a delegation asking if the defenders need supplies, not to negotiate surrender, but apparently out of genuine concern. And the soldier spends 4 pages determining the proper military protocol for accepting food from a besieging force without it constituting a surrender. The rearguard is funny in a way that sneaks up on you. It is written in the voice of someone who would not describe their situation as funny at all, and the gap between the soldier's sincere engagement with procedure and the actual circumstances produces something that lands like quiet absurdism. It is in dungeon bookshelves because a soldier clearing dungeon after dungeon on behalf of Jarls, who may or may not acknowledge the service, might find the reading strangely familiar. The theology of the remaining few. The reclamations is found in Dunmer-associated locations across Skyrim. Sadris used wares in Windhelm. Homes of Dunmer characters in Eastmarch. The College of Winterhold, and purchasable from Ura Groshub. It covers a theological shift that is central to Dunmer identity, but invisible to most players. The formal abandonment of the tribunal as divine figures, and the return to the worship of 3 specific Daedric princes, Boethia, Azura, and Mephala, as the true gods of the Dunmer people. The tribunal, Vivek, Almalexia, and Sotasil had maintained their divine status by drawing power from the heart of Lorcan beneath Red Mountain. When the events of Morrowind destroyed that connection, their divinity ended. Almalexia died. Sotasil was murdered. Vivek disappeared. The tribunal temple, having built its entire theological infrastructure on the divinity of 3 specific mortals, was left without its gods. The Reclamations describes the theological argument for returning to the older Daedric powers, specifically the 3 who were known as the Good Daedra in pre-tribunal Dunmer tradition, who had opposed the tribunal's claims from the beginning. In Windhelm's Grey Quarter, the Dunmer who live there carry this shift with them. When they speak about their gods, they are speaking about a religious tradition that is in the middle of its most significant transformation in recorded history. The Reclamations is a document of that transformation in progress, which is why it belongs in the hands of people who are living through it. The ocean no one crosses twice. Mysterious Akavir is found in the College of Winterhold, the Bard's College, in Farangar's library in Dragon's Reach, and purchasable from Ura Gro Shub. Report: Disaster at Ironith covered what happened when the Empire tried to conquer Akavir militarily. Mysterious Akavir is the text that existed before that expedition, the scholarly catalogue of what was known about the continent to the east. The comparison between the 2 books demonstrates precisely how much the expedition failed to account for. The text covers the 4 known races of Akavir: the Taishi, the serpent people who reportedly ate or absorbed the men of Akavir in prehistory; the Kapotun, the tiger people; the Kamal, the snow demons who freeze solid in summer and thaw to attack in winter; and the Tangmo, the monkey people. Each entry is assembled from the fragmentary, unreliable accounts available, travelers' stories, diplomatic dispatches, fragments of captured texts, and the author is honest about how thin the sources are. What the text presents is not knowledge, but the approximate shape of ignorance. Here is roughly what we do not know, arranged in the least misleading configuration available. Standing in Farengar's library in Dragon's Reach, mysterious Akavir sits near report. Disaster at Ionith. Farengar is a man who studies the unknown for a living, in a city that is now dealing with an unknown that arrived in the form of dragons. The two books on adjacent shelves form a small argument. Here is what we thought. Here is what happened when we acted on it. The good Daedra and their gifts. The House of Troubles covered the Daedra that Dunmer must resist. The text that covers the other three, the good Daedra of Dunmer tradition, is found scattered across the holds in bookshelves and merchant inventories, but the most thematically appropriate single location is near the Shrine of Azura, on the mountains south of Winterhold, where a copy rests near the priestess Aranea Ynith. Azura's shrine is one of the most atmospheric locations in the game. A massive stone statue of the Queen of Dusk and Dawn, arms extended, overlooking the snowfields south of the college. The text covers Boethia, Azura, and Mephala as they appear in Dunmer theology. Not the imperial framing of them as chaotic Daedric princes to be feared, but the Dunmer understanding of them as patrons of specific aspects of their culture. Boethia governs ambition, competition, and the right to rule through strength of will. Mephala governs the secrets that protect the weak from the powerful, the whisper network, the political maneuvering that lets smaller groups survive among larger ones. Azura governs dawn and dusk, the thresholds and transitions, and has a particular connection to the Dunmer people's ongoing relationship with fate. The Dawnguard DLC puts you in contact with Azura's sphere directly when a Dunmer woman named Serana appears carrying an Elder Scroll and carrying a lineage tangled with the Volkihar vampires. The book near Azura's shrine in the mountains is the frame for understanding why a Daedric prince would care about the outcome of Skyrim's vampire questline, and why a Dunmer priest at the shrine can speak about the future with something more than guesswork.